Go to OB. Good Yontif. Sound is good?
Yeah.
Good Yontif and good Yontif. 36 years ago, Tovshem Mem Zayin, the year was 1986, I think it was, right? The end of 86. So, Hey Teves, I'll tell you my own personal experience. So I was sitting in my office, excuse me, in Hanochas, which was on the second floor in the building on top of 770, Suite 303. What's distinct about our office was that we were one of the first in that building. This is a very strange building if you ever... It's actually two apartment buildings that were connected and no one ever really organized it, so you can really get lost in more ways than one. And all the offices of the powers that be and Chabad occupy this building. Vidal. So I was sitting there, and our office was actually situated, it's the closest office to 770. So outside my window, you could see the Friediker Rebbe's apartment, which is the second floor of 770. And you could even see Gan Eden HaTachten, which was to the right, the steps going downstairs to the Rebbe's room. So Begashmis, we were one of the closest, maybe the closest. I'll tell you a story about that a little later with the Rebbetzin. But anyway, I'm sitting, and I get a phone call around 11:30, approximately. And who's calling? My dear mother, to wish me a happy birthday. So I know you think you came here for the Hey Teves, the Farbrengen. It's also my birthday party. So my mother's wishing me all the blessings. I'm her bchar. And suddenly, while we're on the phone, we hear dancing. We hear singing outside in front of 770. So my mother asked me, they're celebrating your birthday? I said, nobody knows it's my birthday. Didn't announce it. It was my own little secret. Hey Teves was a private day then. And then we realized that at that moment, the news came, the verdict arrived, that the Dan Notzach, in the words of the Rebbe, the words that became the symbol of Hey Teves, that the court case was won by Agudas Chassidus Chabad, that the Sforim belong absolutely to Agudas Chassidus Chabad. And that was my first exposure to that simcha. So I turned 30 years old that day. If you want a second to calculate my age, you can do that if you like. 30 plus 36. Yeah. Right. Or like we like to say, 17 years old with 49 years of experience. B'kitzur, and that night was the first time the Rebbe spoke about it after the Netzochen. And till this day, for many of us, even hardcore Chabadniks, still remains a question, what exactly is Hey Teves? This morning I gave a shir here in the Kollel, and I pointed out, I hear this question all the time. Like, what exactly, why are we celebrating? What are we celebrating exactly? It was just a source of aggravation with the Rebbe's nephew, stolen Sfarim. Okay, fine. That alone was already painful. And then there was no choice. And a victory that he's no longer, that the books no longer belong to him, it belongs to Chassidim, belongs to Chabad. So fine, that moment you could say was a victory, the aggravation was over. But this became now a Yontif here, 36 years later, and good Yontif, and the Rebbe called it a Yom Zgula, a Eis Rotzen, a propitious time, a time for blessings. So just to use as contrast an example, Yutas Kislev, so we know it was not just the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe. And we don't even really know most people about Avigdor, the people who mastered on him. At the end of the day, the reason it's a Yontif, and why I call Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, is not because the Alter Rebbe just sat in prison, because Lamaila, in Ruchnius, there was a challenge to the whole idea of spreading Chassidus, Chabad, the way the Alter Rebbe spread it. And here, therefore, it became Zeh Yom Tchilas Masecha, Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, the beginning of Yefutze Meinesecha Chutza, the Rebbe Rashab says, Aselektzach, the beginning of Hafutze Samayonis Chutza. But where in Hey Teves, what is the Nitzchi's Dike, what is the sustainable or the perpetual Yom Tov that we celebrate? So, for many of us, it's like, what do they say, the story about, who's it, Shmuel the Schneider and Itcha Churgen, or whoever it was. We're learning Likutei Torah, and it says in Likutei Torah that 2/3 of the world is covered in water, and 1/3 is earth, land. So one of them looked at the other, he says, wherever he looks, he only sees land. So he says, the Alter Rebbe sagt, so we could go Kabbalah sale. The Rebbe said, Hey Teves is a significant day. Who says we need to understand? But we know that the Rebbe demanded, and Chabad Bechlal demands that we do understand. We have to be able to explain it. So if you were to meet someone right now, the street, he says, I see people Farbrengen, Hey Teves. What's the holiday? What are you celebrating? That the Rebbe beat his nephew in a legal court case? Good, Astaka, Rebbe and everything. But what is the spiritual meaning of that? Now, if you have answers, great. I just find that people keep on getting tongue-tied and don't have an adequate response. So though I've spoken about this today, and I just want to share, I think is critical. So we spoke on Yutas Kislev, what's Yutas Kislev? My Hey Teves, my Chanukah, my Hey Teves. What really are we celebrating? And not just that year, but all the years afterwards. So you don't need to look far. You have to just look into the court case itself, and you have to look into the Rebbe's Ha'ara. What does the Rebbe say? That footnote, the famous footnote that's printed now in all the sikhs, whenever you see the word Hey Teves. So down below, the first note, the Rebbe writes, the day that in federal court was established that the Sfarim belonged to Agudas Chassidei Chabad. There's no mention made of a Geneva, of aggravation. It was established in federal court. So when you read the Ha'ara, and remember, Ha'ara it became part of Torah. Once it's a sikh of the Rebbe and a footnote, that's Torah. That's forever the designation. How it came about? Just like I said, Avigdor, we know the story that he mastered and he was the one that got the Alter Rebbe in prison. But, so in some of the narratives we know about him, but that's not the key story. The key story is the Chag HaGeula, Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. So let's dig deeper. What does that mean? What was established in the federal court exactly? And had the case not happened, had the whole Pasha never happened, what would have been? Would anything be different? So you have to look into the federal case. I mean, it's similar when the Rebbe asked the question about Yutas Kislev. So the Alter Rebbe, in a strange way, when he describes to Rav Levi Yitzchak Barditcher the Geula of Yutas Kislev, he says, it's the day when the Goyim and the Sari HaMedina, the people, the ministers and the government and the Goyim recognize God's hand. And the Rebbe asked the question, Yutas Kislev is the Geula of Chassidus. It's the Gilead Primus HaTeirah. It's Ganzen higher than all the Goyim and all the lands. Who really cares what they recognize? So the newspapers cover the story. That's important. And the Rebbe's answer is because that's what Torah and Chassidus came to do, is make a dira b'tachtenim. So when Tachtenim, the Goyish world recognizes it, then you really know that it's a true victory. If it was just a victory among a few Jews, then it really did not achieve what it wanted to achieve. So the idea of a federal court establishing something is not because we need the federal court to tell us that Torah is emes, obviously. But it shows the emes of something when even a federal court and even a Goyish mind, and even when people who don't have any Chassidish connections and have no negias, in other words, they don't feel they're fighting for Chassidus, that they too recognize it. So what was recognized? So, just to sum up briefly, Judge Sifton, who interestingly, most judges are Jews, I think, in New York, he happened to be not Jewish. It's like most doctors. Is that correct? Huh? All patients are Jewish, but most doctors are no. So Judge Sifton says the following, and I'm quoting it even though it's Chassidus Farbrengen, but as I said, I gave the explanation why, because we want to understand Hey Teves, we have to look at what did he see. Here's an objective judge who had no penias and no netias, not one direction or other direction, and he says, what came before me? And there's a certain type of, almost a clarity when you are hearing it from someone who doesn't have any previous preconceived notions. What is the issue that was presented to him? He asked him, what is the issue? So he said, the issue is to establish what is the legal relationship between a Rebbe, his Chassidim, and his possessions. And he writes the following, which I found when I read it quite interesting, that he really looks at it and doesn't take for granted. He says, up till the 20th century, there was never a question, from the time when Chabad was established, with the Alter Rebbe, and the Mittler Rebbe, going all the 6 generations, there was never a question what the relationship was. There was total trust and love between a Rebbe and his Chassidim. No one ever questioned what the relationship exactly, and what about the possessions. Chassidim always supported the Rebbe. How did the Rebbe live? They supported him. So when he bought something, there was no question as like who does it belong to, and if once he passes away, does it pass on, and so on. This was not a question. It was just total trust. It was an insulated environment, a different world. The Friediker Rebbe, in his prescient wisdom, now we can begin. Now we can begin. So he saw the upheavals and the changes that were happening, that Chabad was moving from the shtetl, firstly in Russia, and then to Europe, and then to America, a very different world. That he felt the need that you have to establish the legal relationship. So he established a thing called a Good Chassidic Chabad. So what stands before the court is the question, what is the legal relationship between these 3, the Rebbe, Chassidim, and possessions, in this case books? And he said like this, the defendant argues a very logical argument. The Rebbe's Taka Rebbe, meaning the Friediker Rebbe, but he's also a private citizen, and as such has property, has a home, has wife and children, has furniture, and has books. So what happens when someone passes on? There's a thing called, he doesn't use the word Yerusha, there's a thing called inheritance. It goes to children. Everyone agrees. Not just legal secular law, but also Torah law. The concept of Yerusha exists. So the argument is that as a legal heir, being a grandson, and with the permission of his mother, who's a daughter, some of these books belong to him. Which would mean also that some books belong to the other's daughter, which is the Rebbetzin, and therefore the Rebbe. The plaintiff argues, which is Good Chassidic Chabad, that no, these books were bought with money given by the Chassidim, so the Rebbe doesn't own them. He's a caretaker. I forgot the word he uses there exactly. He was trusted by the Chassidim because he represents to administrate and to lead and to so on. But it's not his, he didn't buy it with his own private funds. And therefore, it's not his family's. His family can't come and say it's theirs, it belongs to the community. And interestingly, Sifton rejects both arguments. He rejects the first argument because he says he's not just a regular guy that bought books, private books. He's a leader, he's a Rebbe. Why does he have a library in the first place? For his leadership. It's not for his private interest. To be able to do what he has to do, he has to have books and svarim, which he reads and studies and teaches his community. So it's part of his public role. On the other hand, he rejects the plaintiff's argument, which is a good Chabad. The Rebbe is not just a caretaker. Once the Chassidim gave the Rebbe money and he bought the svarim, they never were going to go claim, you know what, we want the books back. They completely trusted him, whatever he wants to do. He wants to give it to his children. He can do that too. It's his right. Not Mitzad Yerusha, because the Rebbe is not just a caretaker. So in other words, he actually appreciated the Rebbe even more than the way they presented it. I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying how it was. So Sifton searching, so what do we do? So what is the story here? Because, so that's where the Rebbe said, Motzei Shabbos Truma Memches, after the Stalkus of the Rebbetzin. And the Rebbe said it more than once, that the linchpin, the cornerstone of the case, that was one, was the Rebbetzins words. After 3 hours, or how many hours of deposition, and one of the final questions the lawyers ask her, so Rebbetzin, do the books of your father, the Friediker Rebbe, belong to him or to the Chassidim? And her classic response was, my father himself belonged to Chassidim, and therefore the books belong to Chassidim. She didn't just say the books belong to Chassidim. My father belongs to Chassidim. So now we have a new category. It's not a category of a caretaker. It's not a category of a private citizen. It's a whole new mitzias here. An individual that doesn't have a private life. His whole being is for Chassidim. B'meila, when the books were bought, it's not a question whether they trust. Of course they trusted the Rebbe. But the books are part of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is not an individual. He is the movement. And the movement is him. I'm not saying that Sifton knows the Maimar Chazal, Hanosi hu Akel, and Akel hu Hanosi, but essentially that's what he's saying. So in other words, it's a whole different look of what a Nosi is. Now think about this for a second. That this should be established in a federal court of law, such a concept that we Chassidim spend lifetime to try to understand the bittul of a Rebbe. How is it possible that a Rebbe is a Metzias? Is he not a Metzias? It's bittul Metzias, bittul Hayesh. So Sifton picked it up. He got it. And the Rebbe knew that because when the Rebbe was preparing the lawyers and the secretaries how to argue, the Rebbe kept saying, you have to explain to them what the Rebbe is. I'm going to read in a moment as a settle. One of the Ksav Yad of a manuscript that the Rebbe himself wrote. And the truth is, without going into details, not everyone thought they can explain that to a federal judge. How you can explain to him the concept of bittul? That there's a human being that's not a independent, a private citizen. But he picked it up and he got it. The Rebbe belongs to Chassidim. And as such, that was the solution. It's neither of the two. And therefore the whole concept of private property is not relevant here. The question is, can a Rebbe still have private property? You know, the Rebbe in his own tzava, his own will, the Rebbe writes that if there is anything that's his own private things, it should go over to Agud Chabad and he leaves some to his niece. But the books for sure, which is mamash a chelik of the whole Nesias. And that's what the federal court established. If I were to sum it up in my own words, the federal court established that a Rebbe is a nitzchi because he's not an individual. He is the klal. And he belongs to Chassidim. Is not a chassid, like some people say, belongs to Chassidim, what the Rebbe belongs to someone. No, that's pickpocket. His whole mechus is not himself. So let's think of it, Moshe Rabbeinu. I remember when I wrote Torah Meaningful Life. So there was an issue that came up because there was a major publisher that published it. And I presented to them, I said, look, I'm writing this book, but there may be people who may not agree the way I'm presenting the Rebbe, and I just need you to know that. So they grilled me and they had a whole legal meeting with me. And a very interesting thing that happened. There are 3 lawyers. William Morrow was the publisher, was owned by the Randolph Hearst Corporation. It's a corporation that has like hundreds of publications, newspapers, magazines, books. So they have not just one, they have a whole building just of attorneys. They told me they get 1,000 letters a day, lawsuits, slander, plagiarism. That's what happens. Everybody sues everybody in that world because you stole my idea or you said something that's not appropriate about me. So they have a whole building. So 3 of them sat with me and they asked me questions. They said to me, because they wanted to establish who owns the Rebbe's ideas. Can I just write a book or somebody has to approve it? So they asked me interesting questions. One of the questions they asked me was, did the Rebbe expect payment for his teachings? In other words, when he spoke on Farbrengen, did anyone have to pay to come enter? So I said, no. They said, well, did he not expect, but maybe was it assumed that people are going to pay? I said, no. I mean, people wanted to send the Rebbe money, tzedakah, and whatever it may be. That was their thing, but it was not connected. They said, can anyone have come to hear him speak? I said, absolutely. They said, man, woman, child, Jew, non-Jew? I said, absolutely. There was no one at the door. Interesting questions. We don't usually think about these things. Okay. Then they said, so was there ever an exchange, an expectation? I said, look, people went into the Rebbe private audiences, or they asked for blessings, and often they would send money in, because that was the custom to help support the Rebbe, but it was not a condition. It wasn't like I'm paying for services. So remember, it was one woman lawyer, she was not Jewish, and she says, okay, so then he's like Moses. Like the Bible. The Bible has no copyright. Nobody has a copyright over the Torah. You could have a copyright over design. The copyrights, if someone spent money to design, let's say, a new Chumash or a new Gemara, but not on the Teichen Hadvarim, not on the words. B'chlal, I don't know if you know, but copyright law, B'chlal expires after a certain amount of years. Like a Havdil Shakespeare or something like that, there's no copyright. His great-grandchildren don't have any rights over it, because knowledge is considered to be the public, owned by the public. What you have is, in order to protect, an author has to be able to support himself, so for a generation or two, he has a copyright. So, of course, the Torah, there's no copyright. So let's say Moshe Rabbeinu's children would have come to say, after Istalkus of Moshe and Zayin Oder, you know what? We're the children, we're the Yarshim. We all know, we say, Zichr Teres Moshe Avdi. It's called Moshe Kibbel Torah Mesinai. Teres Moshe, we call it. And we're the children of Moshe, so if you want to learn Torah, for every class, you have to pay us royalties. I'm just throwing a hypothetical. And it would make a lot of money. Imagine, thousands of years, you have to pay royalties, and everybody would claim they're grandchildren of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the answer, of course, is no, it's not Moshe's Torah, it's the Eibishter's Torah. Yes, Moshe, because of his bittul, if Moshe in one minute would say, I want some money in order to teach you Torah, that would be a big problem. That joke they tell about, the guy comes to a rabbi and says, Rabbi, I hear the Torah has the secrets to all of life. Yes. Will you teach it to me? Of course. And how much will it cost? He says, it's free. God didn't charge us when he gave it to us at Sinai. Moshe didn't charge us. It's free. So the guy is doubly impressed. Why? Because not only is getting the secrets of life, it's also for free. Everything costs money in this world. And then they sit down. This is a cynical joke, so you understand there's a punchline. So they sit down, and it's all in Hebrew. So the rabbi says, Hebrew lessons will be $20,000. Okay. Now, my point is the exact opposite, obviously. So it's not even a Havamin. It doesn't matter how holy or how great the children of Moshe were. Torah is not, and the Medrash actually says it. Why was the Torah given in the Midbar? It's a strange place to give a Mechem de Gnuzi. You want to give somebody a special gift, you take them to a nice fancy restaurant. There are beautiful cities. Yerushalayim is a nice city. I mean, I'm not going to go to Alexandria in Egypt, obviously, but there's a lot of beautiful cities. The Eibush has to take the Eden to a barren, a Midbar Shmama, Nochesh sort of Akriv. And we don't even know what the temperature was, but it was probably very hot that morning. Matan Torah. Nobody recorded the weather. What do you think about that? Today would only be the only thing they talk about the weather. Lightning was a... Right. Why did he take him to Midbar? So there's a different answers given. One answer, which is Mamish Negei to Hey Teves, is because a Midbar is a Malkim Hefker. You lose something in a Midbar. If you lose an object, an Aveda, no one can lay claim to it because it doesn't belong. It's a city, no one lives there. Malkim She'ein Adam Yoshev Sham. And the Eibishter wanted to say that Torah doesn't belong to anyone. Had he given it to Yerushalayim, the Yerushalmis would come and ask for royalties. If he'd given wherever it would have been. So the point being is that there are things in life that are not owned by anybody. And the only reason that a Rebbe is because he's also not a private citizen. He is fundamentally a Ish Klal. We call it a Neshama Klolis. There are not many names you can give for it. The Rebbe in Yud Aleph Nisan Mem Hey, Tovshe Mem Hey, the Rebbe's birthday. So that Sikha that, still, it still reverberates. When the Rebbe began, I think it was the second Sikha, is a televised Farbrengen. The Rebbe's birthday. Thousands of people came to celebrate the Rebbe's birthday. And the Rebbe says that we know in Chassidus is Shelel, and negates the very concept of Gaiva, Yeshus, Amalek, Reshus Goyim Amalek. So why is it that everybody's coming together to celebrate one person's birthday? I remember when the Rebbe said it, it's like none of us had this question. And we know why we're there. But that's what the Rebbe said. And then the Rebbe told the story that in Cheder they told the story about a Rav who became a Rav in a city. And it was a very choshev, a very distinguished city. And he had all the qualities. He was a Talmud Chacham, a smart man, a sensitive person, everything. But he happened to be, the Rebbe said, a kurtzis. He was a physically short person. So though he was appointed, but some of the people in the city felt it was not respectful for a city like that to have such a short man. So the rabbi answered, the Rebbe said this, and the mensch is klein, but the benkel is grace. The person is small, but the seat he occupies, the position he occupies is big. The Rebbe says, so it's not the birthday of a yochid, it's the birthday of the tenuah. It's a person who's representing the tenuah of Chabad. Now that's, when you think of it, and especially now the context of Hey Teves, it takes a whole, that's what we're celebrating. So it happened to come through Agmas Nefesh, yes. But had Barry Garari not done what he did, take the books, this would never have come to a court, and this would never have been established. So just let's take a hypothetical. Comes a few years later, from Mem Zayin, now it's Nun Beis, 5 years later, the Rebbe has a stroke. In Nun Dalet, 7 years later, the Rebbe, Gimel Tammuz. So imagine today, and this was never established, so hypothetically, let's say some brilliant guy, we have a lot of brilliant people with ideas, says, since the Rebbe's library is worth, let's say, $1 billion, I'm just throwing out a number, I have no idea, why don't we sell it? And every chassid in the world gets $1 million or $100,000, whatever, I don't know how many. So I know we'd start arguing who's a chassid, who's not, okay, but that's another story. But hypothetical, is that a conceivable concept? So before the court case, you could argue it's crazy and nobody would ever go for that, but legally, can you really stop that? But once you hear this case, then you say, 1 second, it's now been established, and the federal court's been established, it's over. There's no such concept, possibility, because it's exactly like Teres Mesha. Belongs to the klal, and Sibur Ein Emes. Sibur Ein Emes, so there's no such thing as a Yochid, and there's no such thing as Yerusha. So it's not like some people say that the Rebbe said the books belong to me, this side of the family, not to that side of the family. That was not the resolution. That's a whole different picture. Now you tell me, in Tefshim Mem Zayin, we didn't fully appreciate, but after Gimel Tammuz, we have now in a federal court an establishment that there's a Rebbe that is a Nitzchi. Why? Because Chassidim are Nitzchim, and if Chassidim live on, the Rebbe lives on. Now that's not what Sifton wrote, but that's essentially the conclusion. That Yutas Kislev and Yud Kislev and Yud Beis Tammuz did not establish. They all gave their Chag Agulis. But that establishment is established in a Goyish federal court, and I would submit that that is the major aspect of Hey Teves. So it's not just the details, it's that celebration of that nitzchis. So when the Rebbetzin said, the Rebbe belongs to Chassidim, and the Rebbe says that was the Iker, that's the story. And that also tells us the actual lesson, because everything has to be, what's the Hira B'Peil? Ma'inaf Kamina. Okay, it's beautiful. The Rebbe won over an opponent of his. No, the answer is that we have to now be those arms and legs to demonstrate the nitzchis of the Rebbe. That's why the Rebbe was so upset. On that Beis Kislev, when the Rebbe came out and he saw the Bochum Dreinzach and singing the Dan Notzach, and everybody remembers how the Rebbe was like mamish, visibly agitated from it, said, Dreitzach in the Gassen, Shos Nochanan, hours and hours. He says, Frege Ba'ayich, I'm asking you, this is the Dan Notzach? The whole message of Hey Teves is as Chassidus leapt, that Teda leapt, that the Sforim are nitzchim. So obviously the Rebbe would be aggravated any day there's bittul Teda and people hanging around in the streets. But in Hey Teves, it's like the etzem of the holiday. That was the taina. The taina was that Chabad is not active. Those were the words. Remember Tezvav Tammuz Tovshin Mem Hey, when the first time the Rebbe spoke, or the second time the Rebbe spoke about it, that's what he said. They're saying it's not active. There was a Levaya and Tovshin Yud, and that's it. Exactly that. There was a private citizen and a Rebbe, and now he moved on, and Chabad is not active. So when the Rebbe saw that anyone is doing something that's not active, she mamish feeding into the exact taina. And the whole point of Hey Teves is that the Rebbe is a nitzchi, and the nitzchi is through the Svarim and the learning of the Svarim. So to hang around in the streets is like mamish, it's as diametric opposite of the essence of Hey Teves. So the Hira is very clear. That's why the Rebbe made such a focus on learning, buying Svarim, building libraries, learning in the Svarim. One of the Svarim that was taken was Derech Hamunah from Rab Meir Ibn Gabbai, the Baal Mechaber of Avedis HaKedesh. And we'll talk about that maybe soon. And the Rebbe republished that book and gave a whole sikha Vayetzi Memches, explained it. So it was a dugma chaya, how you celebrate Hey Teves. You push it, learn. I understand it's not the easy part. Everyone likes the dancing and the l'chaims. But that's what a real Yom Tov is. It's not just about a party. You're celebrating that nitzchis. Yutzva Tovshen Chavov. Farbrengen, the Rebbe speaks there about Mazari B'chaim, Afu B'chaim. The way the Rebbe then explained it was very unique. He said, 16 years ago, this is Tovshen Yud. Before 16 years ago, the Shver, the Rebbe, the Friediker Rebbe, he controlled his destiny. He went where he wanted to be. He said what he wanted to say. But after Tovshin Yud, now it's Zari. If Zari are B'chaim, then Afu B'chaim. And if Zari are not behaving in a B'chaim dik way, then Rachmana litzlan, it reflects on the Rebbe. And the Rebbe is like, he didn't say the word trapped by us, but he's defined by us. So today, very simply put, Chabad lives, not just because the Rebbe is a nitzchi, but because we are demonstrating that it lives on through us. The thriving, the growth, how we live with it. So Hey Teves has a very, very specific Hira. And when you understand what the real Chiddush was, what the real resolution was in the court, you understand something which is unbelievable. I hope to explain some more what really this means, that a Rebbe is not a Metzias on its own. It's only the Chassidim. What does that mean exactly? So now we have to already get into understanding what Chassidus teaches, what means bittul. You know, bittul does not mean annihilation. It doesn't mean chas v'shalom, non-existence. It means it's not your own existence. When you say eir is bottled to the moyer, you're saying that eir has nothing but expressing what the source is. And that's the ultimate Rebbe. A Rebbe is nothing of his own mitzias except he's a transparent channel of Rotzna Elyon. He said about the Alter Rebbe that every tenua, every movement, he spoke about the Markova, of a Sena Markova, was aligned exactly the way it was Lamaila. But that a federal court should recognize that, and that we should even be able to assume that, is unbelievable, because that means if a federal court can recognize such a deep concept in Chassidus, then maybe the world is very ready to hear a lot more. So l'chaim, to Hey Teves, Good Yontif, and may we live up to being the Zarei B'chaim, carry on and demonstrate the nitzchias of the Rebbe, of the Sfarim, that when bittul exists, there's nothing that can destroy bittul. The Rebbe once said an expression, bittul kenish bottle van. L'chaim. Sing a good niggin, yeah? L'chaim. Oh, okay. Technology is working to some extent. L'chaim. Amen. Okay. Yeah. So here's that settle that the Rebbe wrote, the Maskiris, the Ksav Yad actually. Show it to the camera, to everybody. This is the Ksav Yad. It's around. It's not like a Pirsum Rishon. And I find this mind-blowing, actually. So the Rebbe was preparing and sharing his thoughts of how to present the case. And there were a lot of aspects to it. So this note, which I'm going to read, I want to explain it a bit. It's the Rebbe's own Ksav Yad, so it doesn't get closer to the Rebbe's feelings and thoughts on the whole thing. And in it, the Rebbe addresses, firstly, the issue was, one of the questions was, there was a letter that the Friediker Rebbe wrote where he said that he wanted to bring the books over from Europe to America, and I need to have the United States to accept it. So he wrote to Marx was the name of one of the, I guess, State Department people, that this is not his private library, it's a library of a good Chabad, which was seemingly very strong evidence that the Friediker Rebbe himself stating it's not a private library, it's a good Chabad. But the counter-argument, even though it's hard to repeat, and the Rebbe was really upset when he heard that, was that the Friediker Rebbe wrote that just upon him because he wanted to get the books out, so he wrote whatever was necessary, essentially suggesting that the Friediker Rebbe would say something that's not completely accurate just to get what he wanted. And the Rebbe used very harsh words for those that even suggested such a approach. So this settle included that, the MS of what a Rebbe is. But there's a lot more that comes out of this note, this settle. So I'll read it and I'll just translate. So the Rebbe writes, Ki b'chol admurei Chabad, as it is with all the Rebbeim of Chabad, which itself is a very powerful opening. He's talking about all the Rebbeim of Chabad, starting from the Alter Rebbe. HaYesod HaRishon, the first foundation is bittul hayesh. And the Rebbe's bittul hayesh, maschil ba'atzmei. In other words, his role and function is to create bittul hayesh and everybody around him, but starting with himself. Ba'mitis. So bittul hayesh ba'mitis. In other words, it's true, full, complete. Heyesim admur. Let me just make sure that this is the actual words. Hayesei, sorry, Hayesei. There could be a mem here, maybe he's talking Lashon Rabbim. Hayesei admur, harizesh lechusei nafshis ve'ikris. Being an admur, a Rebbe, this is his soulful, how do you say, nafshis, his innermost soulful and ikris and primary shlichus. Lenalom ule'edadom, to direct or guide and lead and to motivate, meaning his followers. B'teira mitzvahs b'chlal. Also wants to open the door? Huh? Yeah, understand. Okay. B'teira mitzvahs b'chlal, maschil b'amunas Hashem, shmiras teira mitzvahs v'chulu. Oh, Shmiras HaShulchan Aruch, sorry. Shmiras HaShulchan Aruch v'chulu. Okay. U'la'reisam dugma chaya b'zeh ad kedei mesiras nefesh b'peil, and to demonstrate and show that he's a living example in all this, to the point of mesiras nefesh, an actual mesiras nefesh, which means it's not just a behavior of his, it's giving a life for it. U'pshita lishlal kol pu'ula sheyuchel lites, and definitely to negate any action that can be mistakenly interpreted the opposite. In other words, God forbid, if the Rebbe does something that's not exactly 100% pure, then his mom is going against his very etzem of who he is. So it's not just that Rebbe is a truthful man. To suggest otherwise is going against his nafshis, his shlichus, what he calls nafshis, v'ikris, bittul hayesh. La'achar zeh, says the Rebbe, after he established that he's a admur, and this whole element of bittul, then boyim chayev betur proti. Then come his life as an individual. So there is an individual life, because look, for the Rebbe is also a father, he's a husband, and other things that is ish proti. But here too, v'gam b'zeh yesod. So here's another level. Not just the yesod, that his yesod is bittul, Yesod Arishin, but the Yesod that even in the prat that he is, Shalelin Geya Klal B'Tafkide HaKloli Va'ikri, that it can't in any way compromise or affect or touch or in any way taint his general and his primary tafkid as an admur. Now there's so much you can read into this. I'm not even sure exactly how they presented it properly in the court and so on, but obviously, you come away from this understanding that an admur is not just, as I said, a lot of people are sincere, truthful people. They'll never lie. But here, it's more than that. It's his whole essence. It's not shayach otherwise. But also you come away with the concept, what I spoke about before, that's what struck me. Because the Rebbe could have just said that Mur is calling Yone, is Emes, Lamite, and so on. But he says, bittul hayesh. That means a mitzias of bittul. In many ways, this is the language of Chassidus. When you say someone is not a mitzias la'atzmei, he is a belang to Chassidim. The Rebbetzin said it in those words. But that's the concept here. I always wondered why the Rebbe wrote bittul hayesh, why not bittul b'mitzias? Chassidus talks that bittul mitzias is even higher. So, I mean, maybe, someone told me that maybe because the Judge Sifton would never understand bittul mitzias. Bittul hayesh, he may understand. I don't know if I'd go for that exactly. What?
Seems counter to the note itself.
But I would say two reasons. First of all, it says in Chassidus that bittul hayesh in Eichus has a mile even over bittul mitzias. Bittul mitzias is definitely higher because it means there's no existence altogether. Bittul hayesh means it exists, but it doesn't have any ego. It doesn't have any sense of self. But Chassidus says clearly that bittul hayesh in Eichus has something deeper because that means you can take even hayesh and it should be bittul. It has a deeper dimension. But still, we know a Rebbe is definitely even higher than a tzaddik. We're talking about bittul mitzias. So I would suggest the reason is because he's also talking to the Rebbe as he is in this world, as a ish prati, like he says, chayev prati, I should say. So in other words, even as the Rebbe occupies the world of yesh, not that the Rebbe is a yesh, but in that world, it's also total bittul. Bittul mitzias would be like the Rebbe's natzilus. Natzilus, for sure, obviously. But even in biyah, even in the world of yesh, of bria, yitzir, asiyah, that even there's a level of bittul. Yeah, perhaps, right? Yeah. So I want to elaborate a bit on this and quote a maimer. You may have heard the maimer Hemshech Tofresh Sadik Daled. Is a Hemshech from the Friediker Rebbe, considered one of the deepest, maybe the deepest Hemshech in Chassidus. Very, very profound and very abstract sugya. As a matter of fact, it was so deep that when the Rebbe, Friediker Rebbe said it in Warsaw, so there was a Chassid, I don't know if you can call him a Chassid, but there's an individual who was there, who came to the Friediker Rebbe and said, these Maimorim are too deep for us. And the Friediker Rebbe then stopped in the middle of the Hemshech. He never finished it. So we have it like middle. When the Rebbe heard about it, the Rebbe who was the son-in-law, Ramash, as he was called, he was very visibly upset. And he told the guy, he gave him a good chelik, he said, "What, because you have problems, so either don't come. Why are you telling the Rebbe what to, that depriving us from hearing all these big chidushim?" But it was already too late, and the Friediker Rebbe never finished the Hemshech. Later, the Friediker Rebbe did say an expression, he says, "Mevil gem de melam avonim teves margolias, mevil ham sukikes." The Rebbe said, I want to give the people precious stones, and they want candies. That was the Friediker Rebbe's expression. Just a little more background. The Rebbe chazed this Hemshech in Tovshin Tezvov. And actually, he went on to explain things that the Friediker Rebbe speaks there about 3 levels of bittul. And then says there's a 4th level, but he never gets to the 4th level. The Rebbe in Tovshin Tezvov spoke about the 4th level. So Chassidim in Tovshin Tezvov, I heard, were like, in a spall, because the Rebbe went further than the actual Hemshech. The Rebbe Mama showed that he knows what the next steps would have been, whether he heard it from the Friediker Rebbe or what. But then, not to minimize what the Rebbe did, in Tovshin Lamed Zayin, when the Rebbe printed Ayin Beis, so Chelik Beis and Ayin Beis is the basis of Tzadik Daled. And there the Rebbe Rashab does go further and talks about the 4th level of bittul. Now we know that Rebbe had Ayin Beis. So again, so the fact is we do have the Hemshech, except not with elaboration of the Friediker Rebbe, because the Friediker Rebbe elaborates, I would say, almost 5-fold of what it says in Ayin Beis. But one the kudah there that I think can really shed light and appreciate Hey Teves is a piece there in the Hemshech that the Rebbe actually writes a footnote. And the Rebbe, remember, published these Maimorim, and the Rebbe added footnotes. Just as Derech Agav, the Chvivusa de Milsa, so some Chassidim questioned why the Rebbe is adding footnotes. The Rebbe prints a Maimon. Why is the Rebbe adding footnotes? So if you look in Tovshin, in the earlier years, it says, Al Pi Heiros, or Hisafti, the Rebbe writes, I added footnotes. In Tovshin Ches, the Rebbe started writing, Al Pi Pekudas, Kvei Kedushas Meir V'chami. I'm writing, meaning it was a command. He was like saying there wasn't that his idea, it was the Friediker Rebbe that insisted. Not that we have any snatzlus, but the Rebbe writes that. So there's an unbelievable footnote on a piece there that Friediker Rebbe says the following words. He speaks about difference between Gashmias and Ruchnis. And this is like, as I said, I think a critical piece in understanding this note and Hey Teves. So he says Gashmias, he says Mitziyusei is not Mitzad Atzmei, because obviously it was created. Ein dover eses Atzmei, nothing creates itself. So everything in Gashmias has a source. But also Kiyumei is not Mitzad Atzmei. Its sustenance is also not its own. It's personality, if you wish. Ruchni, as the Friediker Rebbe says, Mitziyusei is Mitzad Atzmei, but is not Mitzad Atzmei, but Kiyumei is Mitzad Atzmei. That's what the Friediker Rebbe writes. So the Rebbe stops in a ha'ara and says, look, what does that mean? What the Ruchnis is also created by God. So why is Kiyumei Mitzad Atzmei? And the Rebbe says, Ulai, you can give a dugma for this in Nigla. And he gives the dugma of Machatzis Hashekel. This is what the Rebbe says. That Machatzis Hashekel has a dover v'fuchi, like a paradox. On one hand, every person had to give an exact half a shekel, lo yarba v'lo yamit, no one gave more, no one gave less. And once you gave it, you couldn't come and then later come take it back. So nice and yofa is the expression. It means you're giving it to Hegdish. Because now it's become, from a Yachid, it's become a Tzibur. Because what did they do with the Machatzis Hashekel? From that they either made the Adonim in the Mishkan, the foundational pillars, or in the Beis HaMikdash, the Karbonos Tzibur were bought. So once you buy a Karban Tzibur, you gave, let's say, half a shekel. You can't come and say, hey, I want him back. It's no longer private property. It became now the klal. It became a Hegdish. That's one hand. On the other hand, there's a strange statement that Rebbe says. When Keirach, the test of Keirach, when the Moshe says everyone should bring a mincha, and we'll see who the Eibishter chooses, the Kohen Gadol, Aaron and Bonov, or Keirach and his people. So Moshe uses an expression, Al tifan el minchosam. Says Hashem says, don't look at their mincha. So the Rebbe asks a question. I mean, this is all very bekitza, but in the footnote, he says, 1 second, what do you mean minchosam? There's no minchosam. Once they gave it, mincha is a korban sibur. There's no, how could you distinguish Keirach's chelik and someone else's chelik? There's no chelik anymore. It became part of the tzibur. So the Rebbe said, this is a dugma. The dugma of Ruchni is that the mitzias of the Yachid is not there. But the kiyum of the Yachid is there. Because the mincha, self kol self, was mechaper, forgives everybody, the individuals too. It's just that you can't go ahead and look in a collective tzibur and say, here's my piece. No, the Beis HaMikdash is now a general thing. Everyone is equal there. But still, the Yachid, his mechus is somewhat represented there. That's more or less what the footnote says. And then the Rebbe writes, Adain Sarechian Vein Kamekemi, I think. So Rab Nosson Gerari, son of Ramesh Gerari, the famous maskil and mashpia, Moshe Gerari in Tel Aviv, he was by the Rebbe in Yechidus, and he asked the Rebbe to explain the footnote. And among the things the Rebbe said was this key line. You see, Gashmias, what is Gashmias? What is a physical object? A physical entity, identity, an ego. It's about you. If there's no you, there's no Gashmias. If I would right now not occupy this space that I'm sitting in, and this moment, this time, this space, then I don't exist. Because Gashmias, either it's Tefes Mokum, it's not Tefes Mokum. It has to have an identity, an ego. Ruchnis, on the other hand, doesn't need to be Tefes Mokum. You don't need to say, I'm here. So Ruchnius, its personality is bittul. And bittul has a kiyum atzmi. Because its personality is, it's not me. Whatever I am is not about me, it's about the Eibishter. So the more it's about the Eibishter, the more nitzchi it is. In other words, basically, as long as you represent yourself as an individual, then you're only as strong as you are. But if you become bittul and you say, I'm shluchi shalodim kamesei, for example, then if this meshaleach is a nitzchi, then I'm also a nitzchi. Like Chassidus calls, Eid is Eid Ein Sof. Not because it has that power, because it's so bittul to the source. So if the source is Ein Sof, the Eid also becomes Ein Sof. And that's why the Alter Friediker Rebbe says that Ruchnius is kiyumi mitzad atzmei. It doesn't mean mitzad atzmei chas v'sholem that it has its own reality, because its personality is bittul. And bittul, the Rebbe said, kenish bottle werden. Because the more you mavatl it, the more you eliminate it, the greater it becomes. In Gashmi, the more you mavatl it, the less it becomes. That's why we speak about, let's say, Ava. You know, if I give you half of my my bread, I have less. That's Gashmis. I can't give you and have the same thing. Who's there? Someone's there? Huh? Ruchnis, on the other hand, I give you tzedakah, or I give you ava, I don't become less, I become stronger. It's like madlik ner miner. A flame that, the first flame doesn't get weaker, it gets stronger actually. Because now you have the two flames that can join together. So Ruchni is, being that its whole personality is not zich, it has an element of nitzchis. Now let's apply this to these words, that Admur Chabad, you say the Rishon is bittul hayesh. What I said before, not about the individual. We don't really fully can comprehend that because none of us have that level of bittul. You know, even Chassidim that are bottle, but still they have a bissel zich. I remember in yeshiva, there was a guy who was trying to become a Muslim, you know, complete in every, in Chabad, Chagas, Nehi, in Haskalah, and Aveda. So he went to Brinwat, he went to different yeshivas, and we went to Brinwat to learn by Rab Nissen. He wanted to learn davening, how to daven. I remember he was a little older than I was. He came back to 70. And I asked him, so, what happened? He said, I learned about what davening is, what bittul is, but it wasn't as geschmack as I thought it would be. So I say, maybe that's exactly what bittul is, that it's not so geschmack. He says, I feel the nish geschmack, daf eicha ma bissel geschmack. You know, so it reminded me of this guy, this executive who would go on these weekends. There's these weekends where, you know, you... to reconnect to your masculinity and to your identity, you like wear skins and you sweat and you climb a mountain. So the men bond, they grunt, you know, they behave like gorillas and stuff, so to rebuild their confidence. Obviously, when they come back home and their wives put them in their place, they lose it all right away. But at least they convince themselves for the weekend. Anyway, he comes back to his office. And he ran a big construction company, and he tells his people, he says, oh, this was a weekend. I spent a lot of money, $10,000, and I was sweating and so on. So one of the workers says, boss, if you want to sweat, why don't you just come down to the site and work with us, and one hot day, you'll see, you'll start sweating. And it doesn't cost you anything. Because it'll actually save you money, because you're... So he said, no, I don't have time for that. Certain weekends I schedule for this. So the guy says to his boss, he says, if you sweat when you want to sweat, that's not sweating at all. Okay? It's not when you want it, you know. So the point being is that bittul means bittul. Bittul doesn't mean, okay, you know what, like the Rebbe would say about habarech min hakoved, someone who runs away from honor, so koved berech acharov, the honor runs after, reidef acharov, runs after him. And someone that runs after koved, the koved eludes him. So the Rebbe once said, that's not pshat, that you run after koved and you look over your shoulder to see if it's chasing you. In other words, that even the bittul is also with pniyah. The point being is, when you learn Chassidus, you appreciate what bittul is, even if you're not always on that level. And frankly, all these high dargas that I'm talking about, Oyir and so on, the Rebbe actually explained it in halacha. That shliach shalom kamesei, the Rebbe explained, has 3 levels, 4 levels, 5 levels. It means a person is a bar das b'fnei atzmei, an individual. And a pi halacha, you can't be a shliach if you're a sheitah, cheresh v'katan. You can't be an eved, you can't be a ben. You can't be in any way, you have to be a completely individual citizen, individual entity, and at your own volition and your own choice, you say, I am going to now, by your will, be the shliach of my Mashiach, of the Mashiach. And what happens when you do that? The mamish, the opposite. Shluchah shalom kamese. This individual that was separate from the Mashiach becomes literally an extension, as the Rebbe explains. It could be an extension of his hand, extension of his whole being. You could have the power of attorney, different expressions. But bottom line is you become literally an extension. Even for Kedushin. You have to be Mekadesh and Isha. You need to be Mekadesh Isha. How could you make a shliach? Shliach is not, it's not his, he's not marrying her. Because the shliach is not a mitzias la'atzmei, at least in that period or in that activity, in that pa'ula. So the concept of shlichus is really just translating the concept of bittul ha'er, and bittul that we find, but it's of course not ha'er, it's bittul ha'yesh, because it's a mitzias that becomes bottle. In the early years of the Rebbe's Nesias, so there was a lot of questions people asked the Rebbe right after the stalkers of the Friediker Rebbe, what should we do? Who should we follow? You know, not everybody fully appreciated yet what the situation was. So the Rebbe zeichens into a few people, he told them to Sipur HaYedua of Rab Aaron Belinitzer, that's how we have to behave now. So what's the story with Aaron Belinitzer? So he was a Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. And he was a very chashuv Chassid. He was intelligent, about seichel, also very distinguished, a big chassid, very bottle. So the Tzemach Tzedek, we know, would go and travel to Petersburg for Askonis to deal with the government, try to make life for Jews a little easier. Once the Tzemach Tzedek couldn't go, so he called in Rabban, he said, let me send you as a shliach. Okay, he told him what the shlichus was, and it could be they couldn't go because of sakon. I'm not sure why he couldn't go. Rabban then asked the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, wo soll ich tun? Wo soll ich tun, Abe, ich habe sofik? What do I do if I have a doubt? Not sure what to do. Remember, there were no faxes and no emails and no quick way to communicate. He's in Petersburg, the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek is in Lubavitch. So the Tzemach Tzedek told him, you should resolve the issue on your own. In other words, think about it and come up with what the solution. Rebbe Marash was the youngest son of the Tzemach Tzedek, was in the room at the time. And he heard that, so he said to himself, he didn't say anything out loud, but internally he said, okay, Weiste says, I don't know if he said kricht avorim, but something is not what means a chassid has das atzmei. You know, he had like a question whether this chassid is completely bought because they're telling him das atzmei. He should say, do what I would do. But that's what the Tzemach Tzedek said. Anyway, Rabban went off to Petersburg and they were sitting at a meal in Lubavitch. Tzemach Tzedek is sensing that Rabban is struggling. And he says, Rabban matet sich in Petersburg. He sensed that Rabban was having some issue that he didn't know how to resolve. Exactly what happened. He had a suffix, he didn't know what to do. A few minutes passed, and the Tzemach Tzedek smiled and said, good. At Mechaven given. Good. He was Mechaven. Rabban solved the issue, resolved the issue just as the Tzemach Tzedek would have. In other words, he was Mechaven to where the Tzemach Tzedek would have solved the issue. So the Rebbe Marash then realized, on the contrary, if Rabban was a puppet, a robot, doesn't have any das atzmei, okay, so what's the chiddush that he's bottle? He doesn't have any option anyway. So all he does is listen to orders. But he has das atzmei, and he's a bar seichel. And he still can use his seichel and figure out what the Rebbe would do, not what he would do. That's the real bittul. Because it's a bittul, he's a yesh, he's a mitzias, and he's an entity. That's the Tanai in real shlichus. To send someone to send a robot or send a computer, that's just an extension of yourself. And that's what the Eibishter wants. The kavanah is that we come into this world. So neshama is taka chelik elakam mal mamish. But as the Friediker Rebbe explained, chelik mal mamish, mamal, but mamish It also comes down to this world, in a guf, in a physical body, in a world where we don't feel the bittul. And the Aveda is to choose it. That's the challenge. Now, for a Rebbe, you could say a Rebbe is born that way. And that's why, as I discussed earlier about Hey Teves, that Rebbe's his whole being is not himself. He belongs to Chassidim. But we also have a role to play here. Because the Rebbe is bittul, we understand. But what's our bittul? The question is whether we are also in this or not. And because it's right now in our hands, like you said, the Rebbe belongs to Chassidim, so the Zari B'chaim determines what the Hu B'chaim will be like. And that's a really heavy responsibility, to be very honest. Because it really comes down to that. I know all the debates that have been going on for the last 30 years, since almost 30 years since Gimel Tammuz. What did Rebbe mean with this, and what did he mean with there, what did he mean with Mashiach? I always focus on one simple question. Don't worry about the Rebbe, and don't worry about the Eibishter. They're anyway not going to listen to what you want. They do their thing anyway. The only question is, what are you going to do? What's our responsibility? For me, I seem to can't tolerate the concept that either people blame the Rebbe or they use an excuse. The really question is, we are here right now. The Hashgacha Prat is, we are existing in this world. We were exposed, and we had the blessing, the schus, to be around the Rebbe. Everyone in their own way. I know many people were born afterwards, but still exposed through the teachings, through the Teiras, the Hiras, the stories. They were saturated with that spirit. So the only question is, what are you and I going to do? It's the only question one can really ask, because that's the only thing you have control over. We don't have control over when the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi will be built. We don't have control over the Tchias HaMesim, how that's going to happen. The control is, what are we going to do right now? And Hey Teves drives the point home. And perhaps that's why Taka happened right just a few years before Gimel Tammuz, because it established, as I said before, it established that a Rebbe lives on, that he himself and his Sfarim and everything about him belongs to Chassidim. So now comes the next question. So what are Chassidim doing? If we go to sleep and we don't do what we have to do, then you know what? The Hey Teves, the victory is somewhat compromised. Not that it's Chaz V'Shalom compromised be'etzem, but it means, is it living on? So that's why we sit here together as Chassidim and try to talk about how we are going to manifest it. That's what it comes down to. So it's really about personal responsibility. Now I know that's the last thing everybody wants to hear. People like to talk about others or talk about something else. But honestly, that to me, everything in Aveda is that. But especially Hey Teves, that's what it captures. So that's what we have to ask ourselves, achlotas, not just achlotas, but ma'aseh b'peil. How are we going to become stronger Chassidim, more committed, and do what we were given to do, which was, the Rebbe said clearly, I did what I can. Now it's your job to bring Mashiach, to do everything possible in your chutza. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the fact is, as long as the Gula is not here, it means we haven't done it all. Now, instead, it's easy to say we did everything and now it's up to the Rebbe. Well, the Rebbe didn't say that exactly. He said the opposite. He said he did everything and it's up to us. Now, that means also the story of Adam Belinitzer, let's not misunderstand. The Rebbe is not saying I'm dropping the ball, God forbid. I'm giving you the keiches to do it. I'm working through you. Like Adam Belinitzer, he said, Boyal das atzmei. Obviously, das atzmei is also a gift from above. The Eibishter gave us seichel and said, use your seichel wisely and understand it's not keichev eitzim yadi, it's not our own power. It's ultimately the power that we're given from the Rebbe, from above, that allows us to do what we have to do. So, l'chaim to our responsibility, l'chaim, l'chaim. We'll sing a Nigan, and we'll continue the Farbrengen. Maybe we'll hear from Reb Zalman in every episode. words from Rab Zalman. Please, everybody, attention. Go ahead.
When I look at Hey Teves, first I would like to talk a little bit before Hey Teves. A few years when it started the problem, the Rebbe started to mention it. I was by the Rebbe's Farbrengen many, many years. At the first time that I personally felt, then I spoke to my friends, they felt the same thing. They do not remember the Rebbe should speak with such an obvious pain, so strong, and if I may say, to be so hurt and upset about the situation. And again, he mentioned, how could it be such a thing? How could people just let it to be, to take such a great thing? Admurei, Sifrei Admur, the Rebbe, the Schweretzach Meister Nefesh gewesen of them. He said, if I would not take this for him with me, I would not go out of Russia. Gerät sehr stark. Now the question is, what actually was it? Was it this for him, or it was something else? If you say only for him, you know, we live in a Gashmiziker world. Und von einem Baruch Hashem Chassidim who are mekushert zum Rebbeim. And the Chassidim who are well off in Gashmis, they should take money and collect back everything. If it is only the inyan from Sforim, Poshin Gashmis this Sforim. Heilig, no question about it. Sforim from the Rebbeim, this is the Rebbe. Oneichi avaya lekecho, Punkti ano nafshek sovis Jehovis, the Rebbe hat sich hereingelegt in this Sforim. Und hat sich übergegeben zu uns durch this Sforim. Is talking question about it. But we can kriegen mit Geld. Die Story ist gewesen da. Rachmone Litzolan, sie haben gewollt, Eker sein, dem Malchus bis David. They wanted Rachmone Litzolan to root out what the Rebbeim wanted. They wanted to root out Rachmone Litzolan as it's Varana Abal Shem Tev und sie Varana Sholshelet bis beim Rebbe. At that point. Ich wollte doch gesagt, gesund sein, soll sein gesund bei uns. Und das ist gewesen die Torah. Der Rebbe hat sich Meister Nefesh gewesen und hat wehgetan, was sie kann sein in den letzten Momenten, als das finsterer Goal ist, als das von die eigene. Ein Fremder wollte das nicht gewesen, die hat kein Keach auf dem. Ein Mensch, was lechere, kommt vom Friediker Rebbe, ein Einikel, aber bald, als hat sich zu viel reingelassen in Gashmis, es war Rachmon al-Islam. Und hat gebadet, der Essenz, was ist voran am Malchus bis David. Wir sind Menschen, wir leben auf der Welt, und ich will haben das. Und das ist gewesen der Beitrag von Rebbe. Ich komme jetzt von der Mentlichen Oliver Shalom. By the way, der Mentlich, ich bin ein chassidischer Ried. Der Friediker Rebbe hat gesagt, dass wir gewöhnt gedacht, zu gehen in Peon. Aber bringen das Aid für der Mentlich.
A voice note going around today.
Huh?
There's a voice note today of him going around today.
Say it again?
It's a voice note of him speaking. Hey Teves and side. There's a hope that somebody had a voice note of it.
Doris?
Yeah, it's going around with the group.
I remember when he spoke. Ich habe mein Leben nicht gehört daran. Hat angegeben schreien. Doktor, was ist gewesen Hey Teves? Hey Teves hat man gewollt erobnehmen uns alle men. he started to explain, als der Rebbe hat geredet in Asiche, die Greiskeit was vor allem von Aves Chaverim, Ave shetluye bedover, Ave sheine tluye bedover, und noch vor allem der Etzem, a Ave von a Av mit a Ben. That there is a love between a father and a son. And obviously it is the greatest love. A father will give himself away for a son, so and vice versa. But still, the Rebbe explains that this is two entities. There is a father and there is a son. Masha'inken, a Rebbe is Reish Bnei Israel. Is der Rosh. Und a Rosh hat in sich alles, bis dem Fingerl. A Rosh is not like two entities, but it's the same entity, but higher and lower. So therefore, he brought it out very nicely. When the Rebbe was in pain, we saw, Baruch Hashem, that the Rebbe had a little Chassidim, some Chassidim, they were in pain. By the way, Rabbi Mentlik, I remember, I used to come sometimes from Philadelphia, and they said, Rabbi Mentlik is in court. Since it was the court case, he came and said a whole day, because it bothered him. But then somebody said that he didn't even understand what the people were talking, but he was sitting there. And then he said, now he said, when there is Baruch Hashem, the Gdula, that it was recognized on Le'enei Ha'amim, that the world recognized it. As Malchus Beis David muss angehen, darf mir alle sein zufrieden. Lassen wir sagen L'chaim und Farbrengen and see how much we are able to take, because everything is great, everything is good if we are connected. But if Chas v'Sholem, we miss a little connection, we have a problem. So lassen wir sagen L'chaim und beten dem Eberschen, we should wake up a little bit and see what we can do.
Chaim,
Livrocha. Koichem Yashem. Nu, Dr. Rebbe, alleen Dr. Menees L'chaim. Koichem Yashem.
So being that Hey Teves, before Tov Shemem Zayin, was my personal birthday, it's still my personal birthday, just overshadowed by some bigger things. So I found, like, Hey Teves is actually mentioned in Tanach and the Gemara Rosh Hashanah. So in Yecheskel, I believe Kapitel Chof Aleph, he talks about the polit, the fugitive who came and notified Yochanan and the people who were already exiled 12 years earlier about the destruction of the first temple by Nebuchadnezzar. And when did he come? On Hey Teves. As a matter of fact, in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, there's a machlekes between Rashbi and Rabbi Akiva. When do you fast? Asara b'Teves or Hey Teves? Asara b'Teves, we know, is because that's when the wall was besieged. Samach Melech Bavel. And then months later on Tammuz, they actually breached the wall. And then, of course, Tisha B'Av was the destruction. But there's an opinion, Rabbi says, that actually, because in that case, Asara b'Teves should be the first of the Dalet Semis, and the Pasuk it comes to be the last, the fourth. So based on that, he explains, why is it the fourth? Because it was already notifying that the temple was already destroyed. It's not talking about the siege around Jerusalem, which came before the other, before Shivas B'Tamas and Tisha B'Av, and same Gedalia. And so the Minchas Chinuch asks a question, how could be a Machlekes and Mitzias? Which one is it? So he actually says an interesting Chiddush. He says that in those days, it wasn't designated what day you fast. It says B'Chedesh Asiri, in Teves. And that's why they could designate any day. And that's why it wasn't a big thing. Someone said designated Hey Teves or Asara b'Teves. Later it was established it was Asara b'Teves. Anyway, I know you may sound like a big bucky here, but actually there's a footnote from the Rebbe in a letter in Tov Shel Lamed Vav, where the Rebbe brings some of these sources, not all the details I just said, but some of it. So I remember for one of my birthdays, I did a little research to find out what my day was like, Hey Teves. Now, of course, all of this is quite negative. It's about a pseudo of a destruction, or, it's not... So I was thinking, even though the Rebbe never directly connected it to Hey Teves, Tov Shemem Zayin, the Didan Notzach, but remember, the Didan Notzach also came, as we know, and as Rab Zalman just passionately described the Agmas Nefesh, it came first through more aggravation than it wasn't, the Netzachim came afterwards. So perhaps you could say that Rebbe's always emphasis was Yehovcha Yom Meil L'Sasan L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim, that the Churban is only a stepping stone. Any negative thing is not the end of the story. It's a stepping stone. And as a matter of fact, Asara b'Teves, the Rebbe says, has more power in some ways even than Tisha B'Av, because it says in Avud Raham that if Asara b'Teves comes out on Shabbos, now it can't come out on Shabbos because they made sure it shouldn't, but because it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, so it's equated with Yom Kippur Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, and that's why you would fast on Shabbos. That's one of the reasons they made sure that Asara b'Teves should never be on Shabbos. But the power it has is to be Deicha Shabbos. And the Rebbe asked the question, why? Besieging surrounding Jerusalem is not like the breaching of the wall, and it's not the destruction. Tisha B'Av should be Deicha Shabbos, and it's not. So why would just simply, so the Rebbe answers, the brilliant but simple answer, is because you never look at a problem once it's already a full-grown problem. You look at the root. If there was no Asara b'Teves, there would have been no Tisha B'Av. Once there was a vulnerability that you could surround the city, then it was just a matter of time. If they didn't do tshuva, then they would breach the wall and then ultimately destroy the Beis HaMikdash. So the Rebbe says the Hira is about the Digduk, even for a siyog in Torah. You don't have to wait, God forbid, to protect and be over on a Rachmana Litzlan, a mitzvah sesa. When the Chachamim made a siyog, a gate, a fence, so you don't, even a hidur, it doesn't begin always with doing the worst thing. It begins with simply being a little lax about a small thing, And that already opens the door for all the things that follow. You know, there's a lot of examples for it. The story with Reb Chaim Brisker and Rebbe Rashab Friediker. So they had a very close relationship. They were the two chief rabbis, so to speak, in Russia. And one was, of course, of the Chassidim, and one was the Litvische world. But they collaborated because there was a lot of issues. They say about Reb Chaim that he loved Chassidim, but he didn't like Chassidus. His son liked Chassidus, but didn't like Chassidim, and his grandson didn't like Chassidim nor Chassidus. That's a agav. Today they all know better, so that's just... And Reb Chaim, so they worked closely, and there was difficult times. The Maskilim were attacking from within. The communists and the Tsars, Russia, was attacking from without. It was difficult challenges. And the Maskilim were trying to undermine everything Yiddishkeit, the Gedushas, like Chanukah, the story of Chanukah. They didn't want to kill anyone, but to take away the Teirasecha, Chukidetzenecha. Well, you have to make it holy. It says ethical, it's logical, it's rational. So there was there would be these asifas, these meetings in Moscow and Leningrad and so on, where the Maskilim would present, the German Maskilim, different suggestions of changes in the Jewish education system. And the Rabbanim would have to either debate them or resolve it. So they had a group of all the rabbis, and the so-called the two veto power was Rebbe Rashab and Reb Chaim. They had the final say. So there was once a presentation made. They wanted to print a siddur that would be German on one side of the page and Hebrew on the other. That's what they wanted to do. The Maskilim were suggesting. The Rabbanim ruled on it, and they said, listen, there's nothing wrong with it. You know, we see today, we have siddurim that English, Hebrew, Russian, whatever, you know. So they agreed, yeah. So then they turned to Reb Chaim. What do you say? He says, I want to hear what the Rebbe has to say. He didn't want to... They turned to the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe Rashab gives a second thought and then a moment, and then says, no. He rejects the idea. No. Reb Chaim said, if the Rebbe says no, I also say no. The idea is next, and that's that. Afterwards, Reb Chaim in private says to the Rebbe Rashab, we both know that halachic is not an issue. So why was the Rebbe so adamant? No. So the Rebbe, the famous words that Rebbe Rashab said, unbelievable. Talk about a Rebbe. He said, since I'm a child, bin ich eingewehen geworden. Als wenn etwas ist nicht ist gehalten, something is not fitting, my Körper, my very body gets like tight, and I feel that there's something wrong. The Gashmis, he feels that something was wrong. So it wasn't the halacha. The halacha is halacha. But he felt that thing is going to open the door to all kinds of other problems. So the Rebbe Rashab said to Reb Chaim, so why did you defer to me? You should have said what you think. He says, because I don't have such a hergish like you. So he appreciated that. What's the vart? You know, sometimes a thing could be a digdukal and seems like a small little matter. But then, like when you say Arkas of the Masana, it's only a red shoelace, a red string. But in that time period, that becomes the big klippa. We know the story when the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe got married. So someone gave him a gift, a futter, a fur coat, and then the big thing was the luxury, the luxus of it was these two big pieces of fur on the lapels. You know, some Rebbish garments. But then the Alter Rebbe said to him that if you cut off the two lapels, say, you'll be with me forever. Basically, he was giving him a... Now, the Rebbe told the story, Yud Shvat and Simchas Torah, I think twice, Tovshin Tezvav. He said, why? What's wrong with having lapels? There's no prohibition in the Torah that you could wear a fur coat and this. Because at the time, this luxury was the klippa of the time. They were worshipping it. It's not a Veda Zara halachic, but it's a Veda Zara shazara lay. It doesn't belong in your life. And not Chaz v'shalom the Mittler Rebbe had Havamina, otherwise he did it. But the Alter Rebbe was margish. The Rebbe actually brought that when he started talking about chinuch, Altaris HaKedesh, when the Rebbe came out about that children should only get a chinuch on Altaris HaKedesh and no secular education. That's what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe said there's nothing wrong with limudei chayil be'etzem. You have the Rambam, the Ramban. I'm not talking about kfira, talking about mathematics. But there's a klippa in every generation. In America, the klippa was tachlis. You cannot survive unless you have a college education. Not that there's anything wrong with a pure education, but you can't survive. You can't, and that was a klippa. Not a klippa in all generations. Every place, every time. So the idea of Asara B'Tevis is that you don't wait till the whole building falls apart. Already you see something, and those that have the right hergish, the Rebbe wrote to, I think it was to, who was it, the Rov in Eretz Yisrael. Not Eretz Rabbi Isaac Shvei, Olav Shalom. Yeah. So the Rebbe wrote to him, he asked a question. You know, the Rebbe, we all know, was so against the shtochim, giving up shtochim for shalom. Camp David, Sinai, and so on. But it began, if you know, there was a settlement called Yamit. Toshan Lamed Zayin. It was a year before the Camp David Accords. Yamit was a little settlement in north of Sinai Desert, near Eretz Yisrael, or a part of Eretz Yisrael, but, and that was the first thing they gave that away to Egypt. And the Rebbe was very upset. We all know the Rebbe's attitude to this. That, that when you're dealing with an enemy, even on Shabbos, you mobilize. Even if they come to you, they say they just want to deal with because they're not neutral. And you have to pikuach nefesh, sofik pikuach nefesh. So Isaac Shvei wrote to the Rebbe that where's Yamit pikuach nefesh? You know, if they gave away the big border cities or something, Yamit is so small little shtetl, a small settlement. It was insignificant, really, in the context of things. So I never saw the exact answer, but I heard that answer, something like this. So I don't know the words. But the Rebbe says, "Be'enei re'isi," I see with my eyes that the train has left the station. You don't start yelling when the train goes all over the cliff. You start yelling when it leaves the station. That's a chacham re'es hanelet. You don't wait till the building falls in. I mean, most of us, actually, that's what's called denial. Until the roof doesn't fall down, you don't call anyone. You know, you think it'll be solved or whatever. And the Rebbe saw. So by him, it wasn't Yamit, it's by Yamit. Yamit is one thing. But it means that you're, in concept, you've offered now, you've given a 1 inch of land, so now then it's a matter of time, and you'll give more inches. So the Rebbe says, you yell in the beginning. If you think about it, there's just a tremendous, sort of Teves, in that sense, is even stronger than all the other tiniest, because it's be'etzem hayem hazeh, like Yom Kippur, because it's touching the etzem. And the etzem, you don't have to have something terrible happen. They're already surrounding Jerusalem. You don't say, okay, you know what? Meanwhile, we're intact. Everything is working. Beis HaMikdash is functioning. No. The enemy is already besieged. Samach Melech Bavel. If you don't do something now, who knows what will happen? Chaz v'shalom. So, what's the connection to our Hey Teves? Since according to Rabbi Rashbi, Hey Teves is like is a sort of a Teves, but a different way, in his opinion, is because the psura of the Churban is because the whole point is, as the Rebbe explains, the Etzem Hayem, why is Asara B'Teves such a powerful day? Not because of the negative, also because of the positive. That means when you do fortify the walls, not just the Beis HaMikdash, the walls, when you do fortify even a digdukal, even a small little thing, then in the same way, just like the negative, that it prevents, that it can lead to the worst things, it also protects, and you don't wait. I mean, in simple terms, let's say, for example, the Rebbe established Tzivus Hashem. You don't have to wait till a person becomes an adult to start working with them. Because if you don't do what has to be done when a person is a young child, once they're 20 years old, like they always say, it's 20 years too late. It's never too late, but it's much more difficult. As one thinker once said, it's much easier to bring up a healthy child than to fix a broken adult. So the Rebbe's focus, on Chassidus especially, does not wait to put a Band-Aid on the problem. You have called preventive medicine. So in many ways, Asara B'Teves in that sense, and Hey Teves as well, is also a preventive medicine, meant to teach us that we don't have to wait. That immediately, when people, I remember in Tafshin Mem Hey, when the Rebbe first publicly spoke about the events that happened, and he said that we tried behind the scenes, and it didn't work. And I have no choice but I have to talk about it publicly. And the Rebbe didn't even want to. He said, why is it my thing? Chassidim should deal with it. Yeah, right. And now, so I remember hearing this clearly. Some people said, what's the big thing? So Barry took a few books, like you mentioned. So pay him the money or whatever, find a way to get it back. You know, he also didn't take the Kisvei Yad, the actual manuscripts. But the Rebbe looks at it, it's not about one book or two books. You know, why is a merida b'malchus, even if somebody just twitches in front of the king, called the man de machve, what's the big thing? If he tries to stab the king or he tries to attack the king is one thing. Because when it comes to atzmizdike things that are fundamental, you don't say, mali kotle kula, mali kotle polga. You don't say, oh, you know what? It's only one breath. My heartbeat stopped only once. No. Every little thing matters when it comes to pure things. Like they say, the Jewish theory of relativity. You know, 3 hairs on your head isn't much, but 3 hairs in the soup, you know? So like if you have a piece of dust on your finger, it's not much. But if it's a piece of dust on your eyeball, it's quite irritating. Arvav al beged talmid chacham is a very serious thing because it's a beged talmid chacham. It all comes down to relative. When you're dealing with atzmizdike things like a Rebbe, and his Sforim, as Reb Zalman said, is a non-nafshik sovis yovis. And it's one with him. That Friediker Rebbe would not leave Russia without the books. And everyone said, what does that mean? Save your life. Pekuach nefesh, decha kol atera kula. You're allowed to eat chazer, Rachmana litzlan, or not Rachmana litzlan, on Yom Kippur if it's pekuach nefesh. Save your life. That's what the family and the Chassidim and the Alter Friediker Rebbe were saying. The Russians can change their mind in a second and arrest you, and who knows what they'll do. But by the Rebbe, the Svarim was not 2 parts. It's like telling, do you mind maybe shutting the sounds of the phones? By the Friediker Rebbe, leaving Russia without the Svarim is like leaving without his body, without his arms and legs, without his soul. It's like I'm leaving without my Rebbe. Remember, the Svarim are the Svarim of the Rebbe Rashab and the Rebbe Marash and Samach Tzedek and the Mittler Rebbe and Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe wouldn't leave, could have easily, it says, been let out of prison had he not mentioned the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, but he didn't want his Chapreisen 1 second from his Rebbeim. You could say, it's Pekuach Nefesh. So you all mention them. Later you'll come out, you'll talk about the Baal Shem Tov and Maggid. Now, because there are certain things that are atzmizdike things. I remember Farbrengen, it was very emotional. It was maybe Mem Beis, Mem Aleph or Mem Beis. It was about Yud Beis Tammuz. The Rebbe said, the Friediker Rebbe, we know, so the Aschalta de Gula was Gimel Tammuz. That's when his sentence was commuted from death to exile for 10 years and then 3 years in Kastrama. Okay, fine. And then, we know, a little few days later came the Besuda that it was completely removed and he can go back and he was released. And it came a Yud Beis Tammuz, Yud Gimel, because the office was closed. So when they finally told him that he can go back, so he said, they told him on a Thursday. So the Rebbe said it was Thursday. I remember in Sefer HaSichos, I think it said it was Tuesday, but the Rebbe said Thursday. So he asked the Rebbe said, say, write the way I said it, and write, and Sefer HaSichos says Tuesday. Now remember, the Rebbe was there. So whatever reason, but bottom line is maybe Tuesday was another episode, I don't know the details, but so the Friediker Rebbe said, what day do I travel? They said Thursday. When do I get back to Moscow, back home? Or Moscow, Leningrad, I'm not sure where he went. Leningrad. So they said, Sunday. So he said, oh, it's traveling on Shabbos? No, I'm not going. And I remember the Rebbe said, it was Pasha Chukas, the time of Yud Beis Tammuz. The Rebbe asked the question, Pekuach Nefesh. And Al Pi Halacha, you can start a train Thursday. You're not starting on Shabbos. You're already on the train. And especially Pekuach Nefesh. So what was the problem? Why did Friediker Rebbe b'shrei mefnei? He was ready to sit in prison a few more days. And again, who knows what they'll say? They can change their mind. So the Rebbe connected it to another question. Why was Moshe nenash? Why was Moshe punished for simply small little change? Instead of speaking to the rock, he hit the rock. You know, let's be realistic. To hit a rock and speak to a rock are both for us equally miraculous to get water out of this stone. You know, it's not like, okay, speaking won't work, but hitting is going to work. So Moshe, in his mind, he said maybe he spoke to the rock, it didn't work. So he thought maybe he didn't hear right. The last time the Eibishter did tell him to hit the rock. So he hit the rock. That's called Heder Amunah. It's not Amunah. He's still hitting. If he said to the Eibishter, what are you telling me to get water out of a rock? Rocks don't give water. That would be a mamish, denying God's command. But what did he do already? And because of that, he doesn't go into Eretz Yisrael. Such a big thing. So the Rebbe said, because that's Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember the Rebbe said, Moshe Rabbeinu. Everyone's looking at him. And when you want something, the Rebbe said, then I remember the line, that when a mashpia wants to demand something from someone, you have to do twice as much yourself, because the makabel is always going to say, oh, if my teacher does so much, then I can do half. So you have to double whatever you're expecting, because they're always going to cut it in half. So you look at a Moshe Rabbeinu, for a Moshe to change even a Tanur Kala, a Chut Asayra, from speaking. Oh, if Moshe could change from speaking to hitting, so then I can go from, like the famous story where the guy would learn 23 hours a day, or whatever, he was such a masmid. Then he got older, and he would not stop. And they said, you need a rest. You go to learn 22 hours a day, 21 hours, I don't know however the story goes. A famous story. So he said, everything is a seder shtalshlus, a chain. If I stop learning 1 hour less, so someone else who learns once a week is going to stop learning once a week. And someone else who goes to shul once a week is going to stop going. And someone who goes to shul once a year, Yom Kippur, is going to stop. In other words, you have to always look at like the root, the sort of Teves. It always starts from the most subtle place. Rahman al-Itzlan, we know the biggest destructive diseases. If they're nipped in the bud and you catch it early, you could avoid everything. The problem is it starts growing and starts festering. And one of the most powerful things of Chassid is that it was preventive medicine. You don't have to wait till the problem. You feed the neshama, not like musar, not like, okay, we'll remedial medicine. Once you have a problem, let's figure out how to fix it. Like the Alter Rebbe said, instead of, how do you deal with a ganef? You don't just put him in prison. You educate him that he shouldn't want to be a ganef in the first place. So the whole point is that recognizing, even at the outset, that even one book, one sefer that someone took from the library is already, the Merida B'Malchus is basically saying, okay, so this is a private library. Doesn't matter which book, it matter whether it's one or what's a half. It's just, it's an echus. It touches the etzem. And in that sense, so there you have, a Hey Teves is like very similar in the same idea on the positive side of preventing and touching a atzmizdik thing. Like I said before, Yud Beis Tammuz and Yud Kislev and Yud Tes Kislev are all Chag Geula, and each have their very powerful, what they contributed, which is the Geula, the Geula of Chassidus, or the Geula of Rebbe, or the Geula of Yud Beis Tammuz, to show that even in a Helen Behester, Yiddishkeit survives. But the idea of Nitzchias, that it lives on, and that because the Rebbe belongs to Chassidim, these words would never have been heard had there not been this whole Agmas Nefesh. That the Rebbe belongs to Chassidim, or this Aces the Rebbe writes in this settle, that Kol Admurei Chabad, you say that Rishon is bittul ayesh, be'amitis, just reading from this settle. These things came, as always, like Shtar Sheyotzel of Irur, when a contract is challenged, and then you uphold it, after that, you no longer can challenge it. You can't appeal again. So obviously we would have preferred there would be no irur, there'd be no challenge, and it would have been just smooth and beautiful and so on. But Mezes Shiba, the Eibishter, has his mysterious ways. But at the end of the story, you see that you come away with a far bigger takeoff. Now, federal court has established this. No one can ever challenge this point, that a Rebbe belongs to Chassidim, and Mele his Svarim are Nitzchim, and the Chassidim are Nitzchim, and the movement is Nitzchi, and it's not dependent on any individual, because there's a tzibur here. There's the power of something that is not, you cannot destroy. That's the ultimate message. So yes, again, we don't want the irur, but afterwards you have a chizuk, you have a strength that is. You have to believe that this was a Magdim Refuel Lamaka before Gimel Tammuz, because that's the big question that people have. Gimel Tammuz have Mitzvah Shabbos Parshat Kerach, right? What did Kerach want? He challenged the Esem Inyan of a Rebbe. Madu et Tisnasu. What do we need a Rebbe for? Kol Ha'ed Gedeshim, everybody's holy. And that was the night of Gimel Tammuz. So the big question that many people have is, do we need a Rebbe here? If we don't need a Rebbe, if we need a Rebbe, then why is the Rebbe not here B'Gashmias? The answer is because the Rebbe is here. But it's now in our hands, as the Rebbe prophetically said, Tut der Alter Rebbe kennt. So we carry the responsibility of this nitzchis of the Rebbe. I had the schus to prepare a sikha called Vayikra Tovshem Mem Zayin. This was a few months right after Hey Teves. Hey Teves was Teves, this was a Nissen. So the Rebbe was being Magia, a lot of sikhas then. You could see that the Rebbe Beshufi, it was the flowing, the Rebbe was Magia. I mean, it began then unbelievable. Which was always the case. Whenever there was a negative thing and then came out positive, everything doubled and tripled in Kedusha. But the Rebbe was never enough. You just resume. You have to justify, to redeem the negative, you have to do something so much more positive, much more oyer, to completely cancel out and transform the cheshach. So this is the only time that I got a compliment on a sikha. Just for the record, see Rabbi Menachem is here, he can testify as well. When we worked in the sikhas, so it was a common, you were dealing with the Rebbe, and we're writing down the Rebbe's words and trying to be mechaven to make sure it's exactly what the Rebbe said. You can imagine, it's not so simple. The Rebbe with all his depth and so on. And the Rebbe, like a surgeon with a scalpel, obviously when we sent something in, it was even, like I said, a chut asayr, a little off, mavil, shocking. That was the Rebbe's favorite expression. And then sometimes Mavil was underlined once and twice and 3 times and 4 times, and sometimes with question marks and exclamation points, Simone Kriya, Simone Shaila. We were zeichet to a lot of these Mavils. And people asked me, did it like demoralize you and so on? I said, no, on the contrary. To me, this was real chinuch. You have a master. The Rebbe is pointing out to you every nuance. Taught me the art of subtlety, and every cheshbon, you have to, how calculated every word has to be, and not to say too much, not too little. Sometimes it has to be gray, not everything's black and white, etc. So the one compliment was on this sikha Vayikra Mem Zayin, where the Rebbe wrote the words Higdilu Lases, which means, how do you translate Higdilu Lases? That's, you rose to the occasion, you did something really great. It was great work, excellent. Higdilu Lases, yeah. Now, the sikha is all about nitzchis of a nasi. That's the whole sikha. The Rebbe speaks about Chedesh Nissen when we say Nisim. Remember, Beis Nissen is the Alkus Hilula of the Rebbe Rashab and the beginning of the Nesias of the Friediker Rebbe. Yud Alf Nissen is the Rebbe's birthday, obviously. Nasi Lebnei Osher. It's about Nisim, and we say Nisim. So the Rebbe talks about what a nasi is, the nasi. And his main point is that it's nitzchis. So there in the he quotes a maimer from the Rebbe, Friediker Rebbe. I don't know if you're familiar with this. He quotes a maimer. The maimer is from Reishis Goyim Amalek Tofresh Pei. The first maimer the Friediker Rebbe said after the Istalkus of the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab gave him a tzavah that he should say Chassidus. So Nashkafta the Rebbe, Berel Rivkin writes that the Friediker Rebbe called him in and said, the Tatamig gesagt is long Chassidus, but I'm not really feel fitting to do it. But since the Tatamig gesagt, I have to say Chassidus. So I'll say to you. So Berel Rivkin let others know. He left the door open. So other Chassidim also heard the Maimer. The Maimer was Reishis Goyim Amalek, which later the Friediker Rebbe wrote down, and it's published today. In the Maimer, which is the last Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, was also Reishis Goyim Amalek, connected to Purim, right before Beis Nissen. So, which of course is connected to the communists. Maram is there, the story with Purim and everything. But the point that the Rebbe brings is this: that in the middle of the Maimer, the Rebbe, Friediker Rebbe is talking about it's Atzilus. That Atzilus, not just the Eidos of Atzilus, but also the Kelim of Atzilus are Kedusha Le'Zazim Im Kema. Because they're also Alakus. Not just the Eidos, but the Kelim. The structure, so to speak. And then he says, and the same is true with Tzaddikim, that not only their Neshama, but also their Guf, and their Chafetzim, their possessions, even their physical possessions are all Nitzchim, because Kedusha Le'Zazim Im Kema. And then in the parentheses, he tells a story in the Maimer that Shahoye B'Shnas Tofreish Mem Vova Mem Zayin, which means the Friediker Rebbe was 6 or 7 years old. It was 3 years or 4 years after the Rebbe Marash passed away, in Tofreish Mem Gimel, Yud Gimel Tishrei. He says, I was a child in the room, in the Yechidus room of my father and grandfather, and I'm playing there. And suddenly I see my father walks into the room, And he's all dressed in his levushim, the gartel, the hat, like he's going into Chassidus. And he's standing by the table of the Rebbe of the Zayda, Azmur, the Rebbe Marash, and he's speaking there just as he spoke in the days before the Histalkus. And Zolgo Einov Dmoyes, and his eyes were dripping with tears. He was crying. And then the Rebbe, Friediker Rebbe, explains why. Because not just the neshama of the Rebbe, of the tzaddik, but his table and his chairs and his bookcases and his books, everything retains the Kedusha. Like the Rebbe would often say about 770. Esser Shonim, 10 years, and the Rebbe davened and gelernt and poured out his heart and soul, and people came. Add now the years of the Rebbe, it's far more than 10. And that's what the Maimer says. And the Rebbe quotes this in Vayikra Tov Shemem Zayin, just a few months after Hey Teves. We all understand the connection. The Nitzchis of a Rebbe. And then this is the Sikha where the Rebbe said, Igdilu Lasses. So I didn't take it so personally. I mean, the Sikha is a beautiful Sikha, but it's the Rebbe's Sikha. But maybe because it had this message that was so vital to the whole Hey Teves theme and story, which is unbelievable when you think about it. That Rebbe's Poshet Chafetzim, yeah. Sometimes I walk into 770, and I go to places that I remember history was made. They're standing at this and this place. The Rebbe stood here, he walked here, and Farbrengens. It's something very sad about it, that Teva, we know Chassidus teaches Teva, Mitloshen Tovu, Yamsuf, that Teva has this almost cruel nature that it conceals what happened there. You can be in a place that the greatest thing on earth happened, but a little time passes and nobody can see it, unless you have, Ruchnisdik Hergeshim. But that place, but we know that Kedusha Le'ezozim Imkema. The Har HaBayis is today a wilderness. Shuhalim Helchem Bey, Kepshute, in many ways. But Kedusha doesn't go away. It's a tremendous, because everything in life is temporary. Something happened, okay, and we moved to another place. But to know that things are forever. And the Rebbe, in the letter, Rish Chedesh Shvat Tovshin Yud Aleph. So it was like coming to the first Hilula of the Yud Shvat. The Rebbe writes a short letter he writes, Over Kayitz, Kola Kayitz, Over Cheref, Vadayin Le Neshanu, Vahazman, or a hergel. I think Hazman or a hergel. Hergel nase asher shalei. In other words, something happened, a real devastating trauma, but then the summer passed and the winter passed. And you know what? People get back to their routines. And the Rebbe's writing, you can see with anguish, that it's critical to always connect and remember things. Don't let things just dissipate or pass on. I mean, that's why we sit as Chassidim together, we Farbrengen, because we want to wake ourselves up and not just get caught in the routine. Listen, let's be honest. I remember once in a Farbrengen, the Rebbe, expressed himself, he said, Ish tachas gafnei v'ish tachas teinose. So sometimes it's seen as a bracha. It's a peaceful time. This one's sitting by his vineyard. This one's sitting by his fig tree. And else is good shashtil. The Rebbe teaches, however, das ich meint, das is gleichgültig, complacent. What do you call complacency, apathy. What do you say the word in Hebrew for apathy? Yeah, adishut. Like the shananut, adishut, yeah. Like the guy that asked his friend, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? And he said, I don't know and I don't care. It's a kiss of death. Loizos, what it says, lepoga v'le noga. Loizos. The Rebbe brings from the Kutatei Shmini, noga. Rirton, staf onrin. Hazaz is some type of movement. I remember that Farbrengen, when was it? Miketz Memvov maybe, where the Rebbe spoke, Mezista meret, me filled me in a refrigerator. That's what the Rebbe said. It's a refrigerator. And then the Rebbe decided to elaborate. Refrigerator is in English. And the Rebbe brought the word in Hebrew as a mekarer. And then he brought the word in Russian, which was, I'm trying to remember the word. Cholodnik. I think the Rebbe brought a different word. Huh? Lodny, maybe. Chalodnik. No, it could be, but I think the Rebbe used that. Bottom line, and the Rebbe says, drei darges in kaltkeit. Refrigerate, it makes it cool, but it's still not movable. Karirus is like, it's cold. And then the third one is like ice. V'chlal no hazaz. I remember the Rebbe was describing levels in kaltkeit. The point being is that the whole point of Chassidus, Yiddishkeit, is is fire. It's about passion. It's about excitement. I mean, the Rebbe generated it, and for us it was easy. You know, every Yud Beis Tammuz, a Hey Teves, whatever it may be. The Rebbe, today we have to generate it. So, as much as it's laughable, but at the end of the day, that's what the job that was given to us. What can we do? So we try our best. You know, I remember the first year after Chav Zayin Adar, I don't remember where I was, Rosh Hashanah, and I remember hearing the Shofar. My whole life I heard Shofar from the Rebbe only. I never heard Shofar from anyone else, from my youngest age. I grew up in Crown Heights. My youngest age, I remember already 4 years old, my father taking me to 770. 770 was then the smallest size. I remember we went up on the roof. There was the skylights, they were open so you could see down. Whatever. I remember Shofar, that was the first year I hear Shofar from someone else's. And I remember, I personally couldn't stop laughing. You know, and someone said, "Why are you laughing? It's a serious moment." I said, "I don't know. I never heard, a trumpet blow." The guy's very good. The Rebbe blew Shofar. You couldn't, until he got out of sound, could take 20 minutes. Here, the guy takes the Shofar, hacks it in his mouth, and siflist. All the sounds are perfect. You know, that's like I remember when I was walking once in Yerushalayim, the old city. So you walk down the steps from the Rova, from the old city, you go to the Kaisel. So when you walk down the steps, the first thing you see is the golden dome. And then if it's Friday, you hear all the bells ringing from the other religion. And then you come down, and I remember I was walking with somebody who never was in Israel before, and he says to me, "Look at the beautiful dome and the beautiful the sounds of the bells." And then we come down, he says, "And we have a broken wall." So I told him, there's nothing as complete as a broken heart, my friend. These golden domes and these beautiful bells, that's very nice for cosmetics, for Academy Awards, where everything is polished and so on. Yiddishkeit doesn't work that way. Yom Kippur, you sweat all day. You're hungry. It's not easy. You're not sitting in a cushioned, reserved seat. You know, you're pushed, etc. Reb Zalman Posner told me once, Olav Shalom, that in the early years he was sitting by Farbrengen. And he was listening, but the Farbrengen was so everybody was so crushed, he couldn't concentrate. So he decided the next Farbrengen he's going to go to the back of the shul, find a place where nobody is pushing. So he found a place behind the beam. So nobody wants to sit behind the beam. You can't see the Rebbe. So he's at Chavega says that. Okay. And he's listening, calm. He could hear the whole Farbrengen, beautiful. Throughout the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was looking for him. I guess he didn't notice because he couldn't really see. After the next day, he gets a call from Rebbe Chassidim. The Rebbe wants to know why he wasn't by the Farbrengen. So he tells him, I was by the Farbrengen. So he says, yeah, but the Rebbe didn't see you. So he said, he explained, because I wanted to sit calmly behind the beam and listen closely. And it was beautiful. I heard it all. So then a few minutes later, he gets a call back. Rebbe Chassidim told him that the Rebbe said that Yesh Emrim, that maybe the pushing is more important than the listening. You know, so...
Als Domen, wie will dir geben ein bisschen, das haben ein bisschen erst, lässt das echt nicht.
Das hat er gesagt, ja?
Hat er gesagt.
Okay, noch besser, ja.
Hat gefragt beim Farbrengen, wo ist Zalman?
Okay.
Der Rebbe asked, where is Zalman?
Maybe he meant you.
I wasn't there. I wasn't there, they couldn't get me.
Ja, der Rebbe sagt, wo ist Zalman? Das ist Heira. Fragt, weiß doch, der Rebbe hat einmal, someone once said by the Farbrengen, someone over to the Rebbe. Yeah. Someone once went over to the Rebbe by Farbrengen, it was Tishrei, and he said he wants to say L'chaim for the people that didn't come to the Farbrengen, like the Israelis or Orchim or that didn't make it here. So the Rebbe said, you know, you could be there and also not be there. Yeah. Anyway, point being is that I don't even...
The story, just now when he said about the...
That he says, I mean, we'll get my bittul hayesh, and that also you don't want to take. That's what he said. Yeah. Anyway, pizza. The point is that. And what is the point? The point is this: that challenging ourselves and getting out of the comfort zone is the most difficult thing of all. But that's what it comes down to. You know, at the end of the day, as the Rebbe said, right after Chav Ches Nissen, when that woman went by dollars, and the Rebbe said those words, "Tut als was gekent, ich getan out." So the woman goes by, you could see there's a video. It's mamish heart-wrenching when you see it. She's crying to the Rebbe, and she says to the Rebbe, how could you leave us hanging like this? I want my son back. He's telling us we should do it. The Rebbe has to do it. And the Rebbe said, if all of you can't do it, one person can do it. One second, I'm in the middle of the story. Okay. So the Rebbe said, so she says, but you're not one person, you're the Rebbe. She said, if I'm the Rebbe, so I'm telling you what you have to do. And then the Rebbe pointed to her that you have to do, and you have to do, and you have to do, and you have to do. Then she went on. She said, yeah, but we need you, the Rebbe, to do. And she was real. She was talking words from the heart. There's no question. And clearly something, her son she probably lost a son, I heard recently, etc. But the Rebbe again repeated again, you. So I was thinking, we know the Rebbe's compassion. For every
something. The Rebbe said, ich bin der Rebbe, sag ich dir was du.
Ich habe schon gesagt das. Ja.
Ich bin Rebbe, sag ich dir was du.
Ja, okay. Ja, ich weiß das nicht gesagt mit der richtigen Adresse. But anyway, so I was thinking, the Rebbe had the most compassion than anyone. The Rebbe would do, I remember once my father wrote to the Rebbe that my brother had fallen and he needed some surgery. My brother Baruch Shalom, and so it was right before the Rebbe went home by night. Okay, and the Rebbe gave him a message that everything is going to be fine. Anyway, in the morning everything was fine, and the Rebbe Chassidim calls my father and says the Rebbe wants to know what happened. So he said, "Oh, Baruch Hashem, everything was fine. Everything went through." So the Rebbe sends back a message. You know that I couldn't sleep at night because I was worried because you told me there's a problem. So why you only come to me when there's a problem? You don't come to me and tell me that things were good. So the Rebbe has such compassion for every neshama. And here's a woman standing. The Rebbe said, "I'm zolshay mit an emes ad mosai." So she was crying with an emes ad mosai. There was no question about it. But then, and the Rebbe still was so insistent, do what you have to do. And you don't see Begoli that the Rebbe like trying to comfort her or anything. So you have to say it's so negaya be'etzem ha'inyan, even whether we understand it or not is another story. It's so negaya that's something we have to do, that kavyochel, the Rebbe is saying, I will not do, or I can't do, or I choose not to do, however you want to explain it. That's how it's negaya b'nefesh. And that tells you something. That tells you that's why that our actions today are far different than it was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, yeah, we can do a little and the Rebbe would do the rest. Now, yeah, the Rebbe is working through us. I think I chazed this before. The Rebbe once wrote to someone wrote to the Rebbe asking advice, and the Rebbe's comment very often was the answer, Katzas yedidim mevinim. To listen to advice of friends that are experts. And by the way, it's one of the eros of the Rebbe that almost nobody really listens to. Either people go to friends or they go to experts, but not necessarily friends that are experts. Or they decide, whoever's my friend is an expert, like that. Just for the record. So the guy writes back to the Rebbe, why is the Rebbe sending me to Yedidim Mevinim? I want the Rebbe's response. So the Rebbe answered, Vos ardir az ich will empferen durch Yedidim Mevinim. Why do you mind that I'll answer you through friends and experts? Don't think yourself just because there's a shliach. It's kegazim biyad ha'chetzev. At the end of the day, the Eibishter has his ways. He can answer many ways. He can answer through a cab driver. He can answer through a guy you meet in the middle of nowhere. We don't know. The bottom line, an answer, the Rebbe will find a way, as the Rebbe says. They'll find a way. So clearly that when the Rebbe is saying it's in our power, he's not saying I'm relinquishing or it's not I need to work through you now. That's what the Rebbe said, Purim Mem Zayin, as explicit as possible. The Rebbe said, "Sie übergegangen von Hanossi zur Koil." He said, yeah, if the Iskashus was complete, then the Nossi could have done it all. But for whatever reason, there has to be the Avedis Hatachten. And it's not a Peleg. All of Chassidus is built on that, all of Torah. You know, the Eibishter wants to run the show, he can do whatever he wants. You know, since we're talking about that, maybe we'll say L'chaim and sing a nig, and then we'll continue. I've share some more thoughts on this. L'chaim, L'chaim, L'chaim.
An interesting thought. When you mentioned about Reb Chaim Friediker, 1 minute, when you mentioned about Reb Chaim Friediker, later on, you know what happened? Reb Chaim went,
So this and
and
that's
Reb Chaim passed by, and I said to him, Rebbe Rashams, who is lichtig?
yeah.
Hat getracht, mit schon outgeendigt, gehen zu Rebbe Rasham, ist lichtig, der klappt noch nicht viel. Und sagt, dass der Rebbe Rasham sitzt und vertracht und ist nicht zufrieden. Ich bin nur die Asife. Hat gefragt, den Rebbe Rasham, die doch alles getan, was sie kennt. Was kennt ihr dann? Sagt er, das ist der Unterschied. Von der Balabos mit der Arbeiter. Der Arbeiter, kommt die Zeit, geht er weg.
Ja.
Der Balabos
Chaim Levrocha.
und das ist der
Chaim
Rebbe.
Levrocha. Thank you,
Rebbe ist der
Chaim.
Balabos.
Shkoyach, yeah.
Rebbe ist der Balabos.
Rabbi Posner, there's a VIP section here. There's a VIP section. I need a Rabbi Posner, I need a punching bag. You know, by Farbrengen.
Hey Teves, your birthday in eternity. I'm going to golly, he's eternal now. I got to find out what's going on.
You read the whole sentence properly? You read
I
it.
picked up the vein for
You're reading too much.
Hey Teves, your birthday.
Because some people wouldn't come if it was my birthday. They don't get no Hey Teves. Anyway, it's good to see you. Which tours? Oh, because I had.
Whatever you have. It's at the bittul. He says you've got things to do.
I came back stronger than ever.
For 2 weeks, you got both ahead. The Simpson, you know the Simpson.
We saw the mile like after Okay, so I didn't know how to handle it. I wasn't really. I talked to my image consultant, so they didn't have solutions. Anyway, bottom line is, so the first week, you know, okay, 1 week, the second week we started getting them. That's when I sent the message that I had a person. Like people said after, oh, he does have a heart after. That's the joke with these things. Oh, okay. Anyway, good to see you. You have to let me know that. You want to send me exactly? L'chaim, okay. Music ended. Okay, that's that. Okay, L'chaim. Listen, my Farbrengen is supposed to be a give and take. Maybe somebody wants to ask something or say something. Maybe a rebuttal
Just one.
somebody wants to rebut what I said, so then we can have a little Menachem. I'm leaving the floor open for.
I remember those years they printed a tiny in the meat.
1 second. What?
Talking about the meat, I remember they printed a tiny then. I have one of
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. What would you like to say, Rabbi?
After Gimel Tammuz, and after everything happened, can you really say to what extent is the Rebbe actually alive in Gashmi? Meaning, like, not like trying to play on the entire, like, spiel, like a 770-year-old. I'm not talking about that specifically, or like dollars, of course not, but like, it's coming in, we're anticipating you have any moment coming in, davening with us. But the real question is that for somebody living after Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe is here. We all know that. The question is, to what extent is the Rebbe physical, and would it actually make a difference to me? Should that make a difference to me? And does it make a difference? I mean, is that a little bit too redundant or something? Or?
No, it's a fair question. You were born clearly after Gimel Tammuz, right? Yeah.
That's 1990, I'm not sure. 96.
Okay, well, let me, maybe I would reverse the question in a way. When the Rebbe was here, Begashmi, saying you saw him, did you really see the Rebbe, or you saw what your physical eyes see? There's a story, Reb Hillel Paritcher, I think a very, very relevant story to Hey Teves. So he was, of course, a Chassid he met Alter Rebbe when he was a young man. Famous story about Masechta Erchin. And then he, of course, knew the Mittler Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek as well. He passed away in Tafresh Chof Aleph. So in the later years, after the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke, who also, he passed away in Tafresh Chof Aleph or Chof Beis? Chof Aleph, yeah. Yud Aleph of. The Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke of the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin passed away also somewhat like 5 years before the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. And there's only 2 instances where the Rebbetzin preceded the Rebbe. So we know that the Tzemach Tzedek went into some form of, I don't want to say the word seclusion. Al Kapon, he wasn't saying Maimorim, and he wasn't taking Yechidus, and he wasn't, a lot of things changed. And it was a difficult time because the Chassidim came to the Tzemach Tzedek and said, we need you. Tzemach Tzedek said, a famous expression, Ein melech b'lei mater nisa. A king is not a king without his queen. So the Chassidim responded, but it says Torah is called Malka, Malkasa. So but he didn't accept it. It was clearly very similar to what happened after Chav Bei Shvat. I'm not explaining it. I don't know all the biurim on it, but that was the fact. After a while, I don't know how long, news arrived that the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek is going to say Ma'amer Chassidus. Wow, that was like an unbelievable simcha. After the time that passed, so the Chassidim were tremendous celebration. Reb Hillel, though he was an older man already, so he came from Paritch, a maimer for him, a maimer of the Rebbe. And after all this time, so they were all waiting in Lubavitch by the Rebbe in the Zal where he would say the Maimorim, and the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek didn't come out. It took a half hour, 45 minutes. Reb Hillel couldn't stay there anymore because he was very physically not well. So he was walking out of the room, and suddenly he hears 2 young men are talking. And they said something that he was really disturbed him. They were talking about the Tzemach Tzedek in a way you shouldn't talk about a Rebbe. Somewhat in mortal human terms, like the Rebbe. I don't know if they said Marashcheda or depressed, but something, words you shouldn't use on a Rebbe. So suddenly he had this new surge of energy, and he went over to them. I heard the story from Rab Shmuel Levitin actually when I was a younger bocher in 770. And he was like a chassid from those years, so it's pretty first hand or second hand. And he said that Reb Hillel said to them, because that was Loshen, he said, Shvenzelach, Shvenzelach, Shvenzelach. I'll say it first in Yiddish and I'll translate. Was meint ihr? A Rebbe is eigen an nos mit amoil. A Rebbe is Elokus. When b'shas yida helam af alakus, yida helam af Rebbeim. That's what he said. So let's translate. Schwenzlich can be translated in many different ways. Being that we're in public here, I'll use a milder version.
Okay.
It could mean idiots. Everybody can interpret what it means. But bottom line, it's not a very. It means that you're fools. What do you think? A Rebbe is eyes, a nose, and a mouth. A Rebbe is godliness. Godliness. Remember, that's the word I'm saying. Elokus. And when there's a concealment on godliness, there's going to be a concealment on the Rebbe. Think about that. Just a simple one line. So what I say to you and I say to myself, obviously I merited, as many of us did, to see the Rebbe in full glory, whether it was Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah, or a regular day. You saw an atzmi, whatever everybody thinks that means, everyone for their own. But at the end of the day, what we saw is that the Rebbe in his full mohus. No, when the Alter Rebbe writes that a tzaddik is ishtakich, that means his presence is here more today, more after his passing than before, everyone thinks it means that after the passing, suddenly, no. It's because the tzaddik, even when he's here, his life is not chaim psadim. We are flesh and blood, and we eat eggs. Is that what you're having there?
No.
Okay, so try the fish. Okay, so we're people. I'm just using you as a specimen, as an example.
I'm available.
Okay, but I'm just like you. We eat, we drink. We're gushamim. We're physical. I'm not even talking about doing something inappropriate. We are people of physical flesh and blood. Yes, we have a neshama, and we learn there's a chelik elokam mal mamish, and every day we say shachzati b'neshmasi, neshama shenasati b'tahirihi. It's all true. But we are chaim psadim. The Alter Rebbe uses the word that a tzaddik, when he's alive, begashmis, he survives not on oxygen and on food, even though he needs it for his body, but his chaim is chaim ruchnim. He says, ave, yira, and emunah. 3 things. That is what sustains him. So that is the Rebbe before Gimel Tammuz. The only thing is, once you see it in a body, and you can see it, you can touch it, you can speak to the Rebbe and so on, and you see the Rebbe, as I said, in every possible manifested physical way, it's easy, because you have the keli there. And it's a keli that's on our terms. We can see with our own eyes, but anyone that learns a little Chassidus knows, when the Rebbe Rashab once by Farbrengen, he pointed at a plate, and he said, let me show you the koyach eliki, the Dvar Hashem that is being machaya the plate. And everybody was excited. It says in Teira Shalom. And he said, let me show you that. And then the Rebbe Rashab stopped and said, he changed his mind. He's not going to do it. He says, in other words, if he shows it, people are not going to appreciate it. They'll make it into like, a magic trick. What they see, the like energy flowing, whatever it is. Like the Rebbe once said, Yud Shvat Tov Shin Yud Zayin, that some people in their megushim way of thinking, they think a malach is some type of little bird. A malach, an angel, is like a bird with white wings, that's floating in the heavens. Because to understand Ruchnius, you have to have different language, different terms. You can't try to describe something that is spiritual in physical terms. Anyway, the point being is that we don't really see the emes of something. When you learn Shayichet V'Amunah, and it says that every little thing here that you see on this table is really the Dvar Hashem, and if 1 second the Dvar Hashem stopped, the thing would cease to exist. So we can understand it. We can also appreciate it. We appreciate that energy energizes matter, but anyone understands that the matter is only the surface level. So I would say the following: as much as it was unbelievable Giluyim, and we'd want to have the Rebbe in a way that we could see it that way, with our physical eyes, but at the end of the day, that don't deceive yourself into thinking that what you see with the physical eyes is the emes of it. So I'm saying again, but that's what we want. A neshama beguf, that's what we pray for, and the Rebbe always focused. Neshamas begufim, tchias amesim, is not just souls inside of bodies. But never think that the ikar is the body. The ikar is the neshama. And in that sense, as challenging as it is, that emes has not shifted one drop in Gimel Tammuz. That Chaim does not change. That was what I was talking about earlier. What if Hey Teves means anything? It means that Rebbe is Nitzchi, because the Rebbe belongs to Chassidim. Now, this may not be so easy to understand, but it means, Zareh B'Chaim means that you and I are the living Rebbe right now. We are his arms and legs and his eyes and ears, whether we like it or not, or whether we embarrass him or not, which unfortunately we are able to do. But that's if that's what it means, that's what it means. So, either you live up to the responsibility or you don't. So I would say to you, first of all, the fact that you're sitting here, means that something has touched you. I would also say that when we learn the Rebbe's Maimorim and Sichos and follow his directives, you are manifesting the Rebbe. Now, is that the complete picture? Absolutely not. We're praying that we be reunited in the most physical possible way. But there are things that are not in our control. What can I tell you? We all wish the Kimmel Thomas didn't happen. There's nobody that says, oh, that was a beautiful event. God forbid. We wish it didn't happen, but it did. Whatever it means. But to suggest that the thousands of years of Chaim Nitzchim, of Torah, Chassidus, Rebbeim, comes to an end, God forbid. Now, is there an Nesayin? Of course there's an Nesayin. It's easier today. That's why I said it happened by Tzoi Shabbos Keirach. What do you think Keirach challenged? Said, where's the Rebbe? Who says you need a Rebbe? We can manage without him. So today we have that bchira, we have that choice where we have to ask ourselves, I'm not necessarily from the biggest, what should I say? My Hayem Yem, which is the Hey Teves Hayem Yem, tells it all. Read the Hayem Yem of today. You know the Hayem Yem? That when Mashiach will come, we'll appreciate the power of Heidah and Amunah Pshuta. The größte Seichel hat Hagbala, has a grenitz. And Amunah Pshuta hat nicht kein grenitz. So Chatosi ani maskir, not that I'm doing any confession here, I'm not going to go into details, even though it's intriguing. Yes, I understand. So to have Amunah Pshuta requires, it's a gift, I think. I mean, by minim b'nei ma'aminim, all of us have it, but for some of us it's more revealed than others. Let's put it that way. So I have my skepticism, and when anyone asks me, do you believe everything you say? I say a lot of things. I'm on the record. So I always answer, what do you mean? That Alter Rebbe already answered the question in Tanya. My Nefesh HaKiz believes, and my Nefesh HaBamis has its challenges. How about you? Do you have a Nefesh HaBamis? I always tell Bachrim who tell me, what was it like before Gimel Tammuz? So the first thing I let them know is, I want to tell you a little secret. We had a Yetzer Hara, a Nefesh HaBamis before Gimel Tammuz too. Believe it or not. So it's just manifested, so it's not like, some things don't change so easily. My point being is that there's always, I can go, if you want me to play the skeptic, there's always questions, and there's always ways to, God already created an agnostic universe. He made sure that if you want to make a mistake, you could always make a mistake. It's up to you. But it's a choice, because you could also not make a mistake, and you could also go with the other approach, which frankly makes more sense when you think about it, that there are things that are eternal, and there are things that don't die, and they may change form and shape, but if Chassidus means anything, you don't need Gimel Tammuz. If someone feels that Gimel Tammuz shifted the emes of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek and Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Rashab and the Friediker Rebbe and the Rebbe, and that Chassidus some way is compromised, I wonder what kind of Chassidus they had before Gimel Tammuz. These things don't change. Either it's emes or it's not emes. It's emes only when it's convenient for you, only when it's comfortable, only when you have all the answers. That's not what emes means. Emes, like Shmuel Munkus said it to the Alter Rebbe bluntly, which is always shocking to hear when he said to the Alter Rebbe asked, should he cooperate and be arrested? So to me, this is a story actually that changed my life, to be very honest. So after the Rebbe had the heart attack in Lamed Ches, Shmini Atzeres, Lamed Ches, Tov Shalom in 1977. So I was then 20 years old, 21. I was like in the midst of my heyday, working in the Sichos, working in Sefer Lekutim, and the Rebbe. I mean, it was the ultimate Gan Eden. And it doesn't look like, it was never going to end. And then the heart attack. So, again, I'll admit my own inner doubts. I started wondering what's going on, what happens if God decides to take the Rebbe. Now, these words you couldn't even utter. Even if you thought about it and someone thought you're thinking, you could have been excommunicated. So we didn't even talk that way. The language that's talked today is not even, that was completely not on the radar. The Rebbe was immortal, infallible, period, no questions, and simple. But, as I said, I have my nefesh habamis. So I had my questions. And then I remember reading the story with Shmuel Munkus. Then the story we didn't have all the details. Today, after the Rishimis of the Rebbe, there are more details. So let me tell you with all the details. The Alter Rebbe was already under threat. He knew they were coming to arrest him. So he had a hiding place in his, this is in the Rishimis, the Rebbe writes this. He had a hiding place in his house, and in case they would come, he could hide there. So one night, in the middle of the night, yes, they knock on the door, it's the soldiers. They come in, the Alter Rebbe hid. The Rebbetzin, they started interrogating her. Where's the Rebbe? Where's your husband? Blah, blah. I don't know. Anyway, the way the story goes, they slapped her and they knocked out a tooth. That's what it says. That's what it says. Okay. Then they leave. A little while later, it's the middle of the night, and Reb Shmuel Munkus is knocking on the window. And of course, the Alter Rebbe came out of the hiding place already, and the Rebbetzin got scared. Are they back? What's happening? They look through the window, it's Shmuel Munkus. And he comes in, and the Alter Rebbe says to him, Du kommst echt bei Nacht. You also come at night. In other words, you're also who comes at night? They say Mazikim, the destructive ones come at night. So he said, Ich hab nicht gewusst, als beim Rebbe mit der Nacht. I didn't know by the Rebbe there's a night, meaning there's something to be frightened of. Now, just for the record, it's clearly that Shmuel Munkus was a night guy, a Nachtfegel, because he's always coming at night. His first story, when he comes to Alter Rebbe, is also in the middle of the night. I don't know. I think there's still a Shmuel Munkus running around. There's always a Shmuel.
He lived in
I wasn't there, so I'm not sure. I don't know. Anyway, bottom line is, he was a night guy, that's for sure. So any one of you night birds looks like that type of neshama. So then the Alter Rebbe asks him, so should I cooperate and allow myself to get arrested? So Shmuel Munkus said the classic words, and I'll say it the way it is, that when they published it, they made 3 dots, because it's so sharp, they couldn't publish it. So Shmuel Munkus says to the Alter Rebbe, Memanavshach, either or. If you're a Rebbe, so what are you afraid of? Nothing will happen to you. You can get arrested and everything will be fine. Und nicht, this is what he writes, Kum dir a koil in kop, you deserve a bullet to your head. They don't print the words bullet to your head, it's just 3 dots, but those are the words. You deserve a bullet to your head for taking away the pleasure of Elam Hazar from so many Eden or Chassidim. Now, how a Chassid could say that to Rebbe is another story. But he did, clearly he did. And the emes of it, I can tell you without hesitation, I read this in 1977, Lamed Ches, it changed dramatically my life. Why? Because I said to myself, grow up. Grow up. Yes, the heart attack happened. If the Rebbe is emes, so what? It's only going to be, you're only around when the party is going on, everything is so beautiful. Part of it sometimes is not so beautiful. It's not always the way the Giluyim that you envisioned. And if you don't think it's emes, get out, even in good times. So you only hear when you only come to the party. Sometimes there's going to be challenges. You're in the middle of a war. Not every battle is pleasant. Some of them are more difficult. But it's emes or not emes. So I don't have proof, but it was enough for me. You have to make a choice. You can't be, you can't just, I'm only here when, for all, like the guy that I once was counseling a couple, and I said to the husband, I said, you ever hear of the concept of unconditional love? So he said, yeah, if my wife did A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I'd have unconditional love. Yeah. Okay. So the bottom line is, in many ways, that immunized me. I had my Gimel Tammuz moment then, because when Gimel Tammuz happened, not that it was not painful and tragic and all that, but as far as it's emes or not emes, and that's it. And I think that's my answer to you, to all of us. It's a question. I can't tell you what is going to be emes in your life. It's going to be your choices. But like a while back, I was talking to a bunch of Bachrim, they were traveling on Merkez Shlichus. They were going to some universities. So one bocher asked me, how could I prove God's existence to students? So I was going to send them to you, because I'm sure you have absolute proof, right? Huh? Yeah. So I said to them, they were shocked that I said this. I said, I don't think there is absolute proof that you're going to just tell them something, and suddenly they're all going to say, okay, I'm coming from, I'm moving to Crown Heights, I know what the emes is. I said, God made it difficult. When Moshe was on Har Sinai, and he looks in the Torah, it says, Nasa Adam b'tzalmenu k'nusenu loshen rabim. We shall create the human being in our image. Now, what you saw that, and it's in the Torah, so Moshe says to Hashem, what is this? It's right away, people are going to say there's a duality here. What do you mean, us? It's Hashem Echad. Who's the us here? And even if there's an explanation, why mislead anybody? Why say Esa Adam? B'tzalmi or b'musi. And you know, the Eibishter answers is even stranger. He says, those that want to make a mistake let them make a mistake. So I remember once by Farbrengen, I remember when it was, the Rebbe says, what kind of answer is that? Why would the Eibishter implant a misleading statement, like saying something that later can be interpreted the wrong way, and then say, you want to make a mistake, don't do it, then they won't. So the answer is, of course, very obvious. The Eibishter created an agnostic universe. He created a thing called a tzimtzum harishin. And once you have a tzimtzum, my friends, we have to contend with something very troublesome, that God himself concealed himself. That means, as great as God is in creation, his tzimtzum is very great. How are we going to fight a concealment that God created? I mean, everyone knows the Tu B'Shvat Tov Shalom Et Sicha, where the Rebbe is uncontrollably crying, where he said, the Maggid says, of a father who hides from his child because he wants to elicit the child's ingenuity and motivate him to really seek. And then what happens is he hid himself so well, the child stops looking. You have to hear it, it's on video, it's something. And the Rebbe says, he looks, and Gesundheit gesucht, Sunday, Montag gesucht. And what do you want from the child? God is brilliant. He knows how to conceal himself well. So the child is schuldig, the child is responsible. God created this concealment. So coming to those terms, I mean, the first time I learned about the tzimtzum harishin and understood it a little, I realized, wow, that's brilliant, because now that's exactly the point. Anything that is a question whether God exists, God himself created the question. How do you answer that? So I told this bochrim, I said, God is not going to make it easy to prove his existence. And let me ask you something. You all believe in the Eibishter? Absolutely. You believe his Molech Hashem, Molech Kol Haaretz Kvedei? Absolutely. Hashini Hashem Nitzav Alav? You learn Tanya Perek Memalav? Absolutely. I said, you ever do an Aveda?
Always.
From side to side, you know, as they say. Joey Adams was a comedian, was by dollars. And by dollars, and he was a comedian, so he's starting to make jokes, and he's trying to get the Rebbe to laugh, and the Rebbe didn't laugh. After a few minutes, the Rebbe gives him a brocha in Yiddish. So he says to the Rebbe, is that Yiddish? So the Rebbe answered, from side to side, from time to time. So the bochum told me, from time to time they do an aved. I said, so what happened to your emunah? The Eibush is standing right near you. A policeman standing right near you, you're going to do something, a crime, and get arrested? So what happened to your emunah? Well, emunah is makif, you know, gamva pumachtat rachmana karya, we all know. The ganef, he davens to Hashem. Recently I heard the story, Yankel the ganef, you know the story, the pickpocket. He was a tremendous ganef. He was one of those master pickpockets. You can look at you in the eyes and rob you blind. One day he comes to the Rav, and he found in the street, he found a wallet, wad full of money. And he puts it by the Rav. He says, Mitzvus Hashavas Aveda. He puts it on the table. The Rav is so impressed. The Yankel, the famous ganef, was he doing tshuva? He says to him, you know, this is an Aveda that has no simonim. You know, technically you're able to keep it. Halachically even. So you bring it to me, you know, we know what you do. He said, what do you mean? It's a mitzvah. It's one of the biggest mitzvahs you learned, Hashavas Aveda. Okay, fine. The Rav is very impressed. He thought, okay, I id the tshuva. Anyway, he leaves the office, and the Rav starts checking his pockets. His wallet is missing. So he calls him back. He says, Yankel, I don't understand. You had a wallet. You could have kept all the money. Much more money than my wallet. And you took my wallet. He said to the Rav, listen, a mitzvah is a mitzvah and business is business. So we all experience what's called today a dissonance. Huh? Even without cognitive, could be emotional dissonance to dissonance. So I said to the Bochum, I said to us all, so you claim you have total amunah b'Hashem, and yet we all easily can do Avedas. Okay, so we know. So we have also a Ruach Shtus that covers up the emes. Understood. So what do you think? 8 billion people on the planet are just as... so many of them, they say they don't have amunah. So the only difference is that we're all doing wrong things. The only one is you claim you're amunah, so it's actually more of a busha. Because you're claiming God is right near you and you're sinning. And they say, I don't know if God's near me. Now, the Tzimtzum addition solves all these problems because God made this possibility. So if you want to put it in these Chassidish terms, Gimel Tammuz is the personification, if you wish, the embodiment of Tzimtzum addition. It creates plenty of questions and doubts. Hareitza lites yita. But it still doesn't change one fact, that it's hareitza. It's your choice. Because you could also choose and say no. It's a concealment, I don't understand it. But the emes of the Rebbe, the emes of Chassidus, like Hey Teves established, lives on. But now it's harder because now you have to choose. Now you have to grow up and be an adult. You're in or you're not in. Yes, it was a lot easier before Gimel Tammuz. No one's going to deny it. So I don't know if I answered your question adequately, but I'm not just speaking to you, I'm speaking to myself, I'm speaking to all of us. I have no question that Hey Teves, with all the aggravation, ultimately did establish in a federal court, as the Rebbe writes in the Torah, that a Rebbe is nitzchi. You know why? Because he's not a private citizen. And the Rebbe belongs to Chassidim, and Chassidim can never die, to put it very bluntly. And because a Rebbe is bittul, like I read from that note, bittul, kol inyonei, Seid Harishan of Admuri Chabad, bittul hayesh b'amitis. That's a zikr. And bittul kenish bottle werden. That's what it comes down to. Now,
Both.
you ask your mashpia that question.
Wait, what about both?
Okay. So l'chaim, everyone. Your choices are sacred. I don't want to quote the famous cynic that he said, we must believe in free will, we have no choice. So, bottom line is this, we do have a choice. The choice is whether we're going to recognize this emes, and I think that's the Hey Teves question. The emes is there, a Goyish, non-Jewish, Gentile judge Sifton recognized it. He recognized the Rebbetzins powerful words that a Rebbe belongs to Chassidim. I think that no Chassid would imagine that a Goyish judge should understand such a edle concept, because essentially it means that the Rebbe is not a private citizen, and it was very big chiddush because it would have been so easy to simply say the Rebbe is a private citizen also, and some of his books belong to his heirs. No one questioned that Barry Garari was not an heir, but once you make the Rebbe is not a private citizen, it changes everything. So how could a federal court have established that? I marvel at that. Is there anyone on earth that is not a private citizen? Even the President of the United States, even when he's president. Yes, there are duties he has that are completely dedicated to his people, but he has private property. And here the judge clearly took those words. So you have nitzchis of a Nazi, le'enei kol ha'amim, and it actually should make us embarrassed, because some of us are questioning the nitzchis of the Rebbe. Sifton didn't have that question. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Chaim.
It's a good question. Ask your mashpia.
That's it.
Let's hear a meeting. Let's start a meeting.
What do you guys? You better make sure. If you're not sure, you better
Oh, thank you. Good to see you. I don't mean I say? I am at a stage I can't have less achlotas than that. I thank God. Have always saw the Rebbe as global. Unless you change the world, keeps phenomena is not enough. And even what's Frieda you want? Even Commonwealth Avenue. And that's it. Not L'chaim would always. I meet him in 770. I love this exchange. He would tell me, "Du weißt doch, du bist doch am Ende fest am Ende. Du weißt doch, mit Schneekevers gewinnt die ganze Welt. Der Rebbe ist das." I said, "Who's asked this?" In every taxi, there's a picture of the Rebbe in Israel. In every falafel shop. So I said to him, "Marcus, I'm all getting China." China. He says, "Yeah, you know how many people live there? 1.7 billion, 8 billion. Billion, billion. Okay, the kleine Gala Chinese, you know. Okay. Next. Yes, what about India? So, but she needs to have it all India. So I said, but Hoidu, not, how many? 1.5 billion. Says, the divas machen the customer service for Dell and for, they drive Ubers. So I said, okay, so basically, Shemavat Legavan, 3.3 billion, half the world. So, my point, no, I love the guy. But, what should I say? I've been saying this all day, but I don't know. I have to hold on to that possibility. I mean, let's be honest, if the Rebbeim said, Chassidus nishke maflega, for everybody, they meant it, right? People tell me, even around here, they tell me, what are you talking about? Chassidus for everybody. 1 in 1,000 can appreciate this. So I said, I'm not talking about learning ayin beis for everybody. To the children, Chassidus is for children. Yeah, but then it could be a nigger, it could be a sipur. Who says it's, you have to understand every dagger in Meichus Temah, you know? Huh? Yeah. Anyway, you know my taters already. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim.
See, online, they think there's 1,000 people sitting there.
Midnight crowd changes.
That's the power of it.
I sometimes sit in one room, no one's there.
I know exactly.
It doesn't matter,
It
yeah.
looks like the brown chair with the torn Alter Rebbe's memoir behind you.
So, so one of the things that the Rebbe, as I mentioned before, on Beis Kislev, when the Bochrim were Dreinzich were hanging around the streets, the Rebbe was visibly upset. Everyone thought he was going to say a sicha, but the Rebbe instead was yelling literally at the Bochrim and the people hanging around, and saying that what you're doing, by the Rebbe's words were very sharp. It's been treitzach in the gassen, shos noch anand, hours on end, shos noch anand, and mitzählt the fliegelen, which is either the flies or the feglach or the birds. And the Rebbe said, Fregich ba'ayich, I ask you, this is called the da-notzach of the Sfarim. The whole point is for them to learn the Sfarim, and that we're active. And instead, this is what you're doing. So, in the Sikha Tezvo of Tammuz, Tavshin Mem Hey, when the Rebbe first started talking about it, I just want to read the exact language. I have it here. I wrote it down. So the Rebbe said the following words. Here. He was saying one of the big arguments against that Chabad is really not active anymore. So what do you mean? What are you talking about? The Sfarim, the library is not active, Agudas Chabad is not active, Chassidus is not active. So now it's time to take the books and then split and give it to the rightful owners. The Rebbe's words were, exact opposite is true. Not only is it active, he says, noch mehr lebendiger, noch mehr starker und noch mehr aktiv. Bei uns, zwischen uns und durch uns, bei jeder Iden und bei allen Iden bis in der ganze Welt. It's exact language, exact words. Now, every word is precise. I remember hearing from an older Chassid, but he was a Bocher in the time of the Friediker Rebbe. I think it was Tavshin Ches or Tavshin Tes. So those years, the Friediker Rebbe was not seen in public very often, not at all actually. Even Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, only a few people were allowed in. So they, for months on end, or maybe even years, most Chassidim didn't see the Rebbe. So you could imagine how much there was a tshuka, a yearning to see the Rebbe. You know, just agav, the story of the Haneres Halolo. You know how that was composed? The Chabad Haneres Halolo was because the Rebbe Marash would not come out in public so often. One of the times he came out was for candle lighting, Hanukkah candle. So the Chassidim composed a song as long as possible to keep the Rebbe there so they can be with the Rebbe longer. That's why it's such a long niggin. Yeah? So next time you sing Haneres Halolo, just keep that in mind. It's about his kashrus. They wanted to be with the Rebbe Marash, so they sang a niggin. That lasts a good 7 minutes, you know? Yeah. So the Rebbe, Friediker Rebbe, would go out on the porch. If you know, by 770 to the right, where they build the sukkah, there's a porch, you know, going in the courtyard there. There was vines. There's even a picture of the Friediker Rebbe sitting there with the vines around the porch. Friediker Rebbe once said, "Memeint as gei chapen Luft, the gei mezacher sein dem Avir." That when the Rebbe Friediker Rebbe would go, they think I'm going to get some fresh air. I'm going to refine the Avir, the air, the atmosphere. So one day, I don't know why or how, someone seemingly parted the vines, and the guy showed me that when you stand right near the library on Eastern Parkway on the street, you could see, there was an angle where you could see the Rebbe, Friediker Rebbe sitting there. So word got out very quickly, you know, The Rebbe can be seen. So, so the Rebbe was coming. So people came from all over. Bedford and Dean was the yeshiva. So the Bachrim, I don't know how many there were, 20, 30, whatever it was, they all came to see the Rebbe. And they're standing on Eastern Parkway looking. Friediker Rebbe noticed them. So he made with his hand that they should walk by. They should walk by. So they walked by. They walked through the courtyard to Union Street, which was open then. And one Bacher had I guess, a tremendous thirst to see the Rebbe again. So he went around on Kingston, came back, and went through again. Okay. They went back to yeshiva, and then what they know, next thing, a call comes to the yeshiva from the secretary of the Rebbe, the Friediker Rebbe. Mizal gefin the Bacher that went the second time. The Rebbe will Mizal sagen, as a Bacher darf sich nicht drehen in the Gassen. That Bacher shouldn't be hanging around the streets. In other words, the first time you come to see the Rebbe, the second time is already your own hanging in the streets. I mean, by the Rebbe, that was already hanging around the streets. So, what you see from that aggravation of the Rebbe, because by Hey Teves was all about the nitzchias, the eternity, and the perpetual commitment and devotion to Rebbe, to Chassidus. And if that's lacking, the whole Hey Teves is like the Rebbe said, a chuchat lula. He says it's a joke. What are you doing? You're taking a day that's supposed to represent how active it is and how much more active, and you're doing the exact opposite. You're showing that you're just a leidiger. The Rebbe didn't use that word. A leidiger is just you're hanging around in the streets. So that tells you the extent of what the message is about being active. So you look at the Rebbe's words. I was thinking, lebedik starker and active. So in Chassidus there's a concept of oir koyach and chayes. Oir koyach and chayes is 3 levels of energy. And perhaps the Rebbe is saying lebediker is chayes, starker is chezek, is tekef, is maybe koyach, and active is oir, which is of course the active energy and illumination that oir provides. So even though the Rebbe is using simple words, but I remember when I was a young bacher, one of the things that impressed me, I was standing upstairs in 770, the Rebbe was speaking to the women. 3 times a year, the Rebbe would speak before Rosh Hashanah, before Shavuos, and after Shavuos. One year was the 4th time, Mitzvah Shabbos Bereishis Lamed Hey, when the Rebbe came out with Mivtza Neshek. And the Rebbe was speaking about, I remember right in the beginning of the Sikha, the Rebbe said something which sounds so deceptively simple. The Rebbe said that Torah is Torah Eir, Heroa B'chaim, se baleicht jeder Winkel und jeder Chelik von der Welt und beweist a derech, a lichtike derech, wie man darf sich aufhören. Anyway, I was standing near Moshe Marozov, Olav Shalom, and he was the son of Chanya Marozov, the famous Chanya Marozov, and he was standing near Rabbi Hillel, Olav Shalom. Yeah. And Moshe says to Rabbi Hillel, right after the Sikha, he says, "Geher der Rebbe Machatzis given a darge lifnei atzimtzum." So I said to myself, "What? 1 second, the Rebbe didn't mention tzimtzum. He didn't mention anything." But then I realized the Rebbe said lichtigkeit, oir, teir is oir, and baleicht. And I realized that every word, sometimes you say it in simple language. He's speaking even to Tzivus Hashem. That some of the deepest concepts in Chassidus, I can tell you without question, I've seen it with my own eyes, lies in these words that you never imagine. And then it was confirmed, because I remember once at a Farbrengen, it was Shabbos, it was after that week, there was a Kinus for Tzivus Hashem, on Thursday, I think, and then the Rebbe said that he spoke to Tzivus Hashem, and everybody thinks he was speaking to children, so it was, like children's language. And the emes is, and them liegt tief in Yanim Chassidus, and he said, now in this Farbrengen, he's going to explain. And the Rebbe took mamish language to children and explained the deepest dargas, which frankly is for me been a real like a compass and guide, because Chassidus does not have to remain abstract for it to be powerful. Some people think the more you don't understand it. Like I remember somebody was, I don't want to say names, he was at a shir, a guy was giving a shir for 3 hours. And a lot of people came to hear it. I wasn't there, someone told me afterwards. And I said, so what was, I said, everybody left and said they didn't understand. It was so deep, nobody understood anything. So, I smiled to myself, First of all, how do you know? Maybe it was just the emperor with no clothes. If nobody understood, maybe it wasn't deep at all. Maybe it was just nonsense. Not that I was challenging, but, how do you know? Not one person understood it was so deep. Okay, well, I don't know if that's exactly a mile of a teacher that nobody understands what he's saying. My point is that there's a misconception. First of all, it's sad to say this, but a lot of people think, people tell me, I'm talking about real Tmimim that learned in yeshiva, shluchim. I always hated Chassidus. It just meant nothing to me, and it was actually always very, something, nigla maybe sometimes I understand. There are people that said that, yeah. And then for others, maybe they don't hate it, but it's irrelevant. Or yes, it's very interesting abstract ideas. So I said, I think you're the one that told me that, no?
I've been saying this.
Yeah. Anyway, the point being is that the Rebbeim talk about Hey Teves. They gave us Torah. The Rebbeim gave us Chassidus. Of all the things that Rebbeim chose to do more than anything else, we know was teaching, learning, teaching, and writing Chassidus. Just look at I talk Pashat B'derech HaTeva, very natural begashmias. How many pages of Chassidus were written from the Alter Rebbe to the Rebbe? Okay, the Rebbe didn't write as much as the other Rebbeim, but he spoke more than everyone else. The Alter Rebbe, by the way, interestingly, besides Tanya and Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe also spoke most is Hanochas. But the other Rebbeim wrote, you count the pages, again, you don't need, we're not even getting to the depth. It would take years upon years to write all that. And of all the things that Rebbeim chose to do, they could have said, you know what, there's so many Chassidim who want advice, who need consolation, who need chizuk, who need comfort, whatever. They could have seen Yechidus like all day. People come see them. No, they decided to write Chassidus. Yes, there was Yechidus also and answers, but the bulk, the Maskirim would always say that the Rebbe, most of the day was learning. And he would answer questions, he did what he had to do, but it was learning. I remember hearing once from Leibel Groner that when a new kuntres came out, like a kuntres from the Rebbe Rashab or a Maimer, all day the Rebbe was excited, was walking around with the kuntres in his hand. Even when he was doing other things, it was all like, not God forbid tangential, but the kuntres was the center of it all. And it's not a surprise. Torah is Torah Hashem, everything goes through Torah. Like I remember once walking to 770, and I met a guy from Williamsburg. This was in the 70s, when all the issues with certain groups were existing. So I remember the guy asked me, where could he go to a shul for a minyan? So I told him, right in the corner, there's a shul called 770 Eastern Parkway. So he said to me, they daven there? I said, they daven and they learn. I said, what did you think? He says, he thought it was a parking lot of mitzvah tanks. Because all he knows about Chabad is that the activism and that they're going a mitzvah tank. So he thought there's probably one central place with a lot of mitzvah tanks, and the Rebbe comes out and cheers them on every morning, and that's what Chabad does. So, and he wasn't being, he wasn't being facetious. He was sincere and honest. And so I said to him, why don't you walk down the street and do yourself a favor and walk into 770 and then let me know. First of all, you're not going to find a parking lot there exactly. You can't find parking actually around 770 easily. What you will find is hundreds of people davening, hundreds of bochrim learning, and all day and all night, basically. What I was saying was, I was thinking, wow, so all he knows is about, so they think, okay, that the Rebbe was an activist. You open up any sikha, any maimer, you don't see much activism there. You see hours and hours of mayin hamizgaber, a mayim she'en lem sof, in nigla and chassidus and pshat, remez, drush, sod, intricate, complicated. And then at the end of every sikha, Teira Melosh Neirah, and here's the lesson. You have to go out, and whether it's miftzayim or shlichus or whatever it is. But if you didn't know better, you'd think that the Rebbe just gets up and says, okay, everybody go on a Mitzvah Chanukah, and that's it. Never was that way. First came 2 hours of explaining what Chanukah is. And Al Pi Kabbalah, and Al Pi Chassidus, and Al Pi Nigla. Why? Because unfortunately, social activism is the thing most people know Chabad for. So these hours that the Rebbeim put into Chassidus, and I'm always like shocked by it. Even if you don't fully understand it, but at least say that there must be something, some secret here that they felt was the single most important thing they can leave for us, is the Chassidus that they wrote. And yes, exactly the Rebbe Rashab saying, Irgein Himmel the Ksovim la Zechaich. The Ksovim, the Rebbe, Friediker Rebbe not wanting to leave Russia without the books. The Anon Nafshik Ksovim. This is them. Alter Rebbe says it clear in Tanya, that how do you write in a book something that comparable to Yechidus? There's nothing like face-to-face. So he did it because Yedei Makirei Kamina. Because I know you, you know me, and I'm able to put into a book our personal, intimate interactions. In other words, Tanya is like the Rebbe sitting with you personally, which by extension means all of Chassidus. So it's still shocking that people would think that that Chassidus is either irrelevant or abstract, or for maskilim or something like that. So, from my perspective, Hey Teves is if you haven't discovered it, maybe it's a day to discover, and if you have discovered it, it's a day to rediscover the absolute relevance. You know, I say this very often. I speak in different places in shuls, and you know, you sometimes go to a shul, and by Kriyas HaTorah, they're the people who are masters of correcting the Balkeda. You know those masters? Every time they fix this word and they fix that word. Do you mind, by the way, either, I mean, this is a Farbrengen going on. Huh? Shliach, huh? Anyway, do me a favor. So I'm coming to, so after a talk, so one of these places I was in a shul, it was a yeshiva shul, and the yukim, they were fixing the Balk Kriya. So I decided, you know, in a subtle way, I'm gonna, I don't know, I guess put them in their place. Maybe I don't know what exactly my intention was. So I said, you know, I was noticing how precise your Kriyas HaTorah is, so beautiful. How you make sure there's not one mistake and everybody corrects. I said, does anybody have shalom bias issues in this shul here? You know, they were already uncomfortable with the question. Anybody has issues with children? Anybody has personal issues? Yeah, okay. And some people nodded. I said, the Torah that we just read is Teres Chaim, Hi Chayenu Ve'Eira Yimenu, and Hira B'Chaim. Do any of you open up the Parsha to try to find answers in your personal life that God is giving you in the Torah? It's God's Torah. Or you go to therapy, or you go into denial, or you take medication. And I saw that people were quite uncomfortable with this approach. I said, I'm not here to say Musar, but I'm asking a question. You're so medayik in every word, but do you ever open up a Parsha to find an answer in your personal life? So afterwards, a few people told me it was right on the button what you said, but it was embarrassing. So in other words, we could have a Torah and have complete amunah that the Torah is mamish God's Torah, and we call it a blueprint for life, Hira B'Chaim, etc., etc., and yet we don't know how to turn to it. Now, I'm not criticizing. No one taught them. How are you going to open up a Parshas, let's say, a Mitzvah, and find a lesson in life? For that matter, Parsha Vayigash. So here and there are lessons that are pretty obvious. You know, we all can learn from Chetei Tzadas, and there's other stories, Avram Avinu. This is what Chassidus is. It's about bringing a live Torah in a way that every letter and every word is relevant. So the Rebbe was medayik in a Vov and a Rashi, and then explain how that changes a whole perspective on how to look at life, how to look at yourself, how to look at Avodas Hashem. So, in very simple, practical terms, Hey Teves is the commitment to this approach. Now, I don't know, for some reason, and I don't see this as a compliment, people tell me, oh, yeah, okay, you're into Chassidus applied, you're applying Chassidus, applying to, as if it's my thing. To me, Torah Meloshen Hira means that you take Torah and you apply it to life. I just use that word. This is our domain. This is what our shlichus is. So I'll say this. If Chassidus doesn't speak to you, maybe it's time to start speaking to you. Find someone, challenge them, ask questions. By all means, be skeptical. But ask. Because if this is the Yerusha that Rebbeim gave us, it means that they felt that this is the lifesaver for us, for our children, for our families. I can tell you without question that I believe personally that the reason there's psychology on earth is because God saw that you can't bring godliness through Torah, so He sent these nutty psychologists like Freud and all these others that need more therapy than their clients do. Because psychology is the study of the soul, and long before Freud and long before modern psychology came the Alter Rebbe, who wrote Sefer HaTanya, and they provided for us the best psychology for life. Now, I know the word psychology people feel is like a secular word. I remember going to Montreal, and who was it? What was his name? Zalman Shur. Remember him? He was very blunt. He says to me, I met him in shul in Montreal, he says to me, bringst da rein alle schwarze Jahre into Chassidus, psychology, spirituality, what's it, alles Sheel Tachtes. He started yelling at me. So I said, Reb Zalman, what's means spirituality? He says, ich weiß, it's Aveda Zora. So I said to him, it means Ruchnius. Nein, das ist nicht Ruchnius. Was ist Ruchnius? Ave v'yira. That's what he says to me. So I said, okay. I mean, I didn't argue with him. I said, Wiffel, you don't know English, so maybe he just, and psychology too. I know of course there's psychology that is considered to be completely antithetical to Torah and Yiddishkeit. The Rebbe spoke about it also as well. Yutzvat Lamed Bet. For example, he didn't say Freud, but he hinted to him, people who feel that the human being is an animal, etc. The world is a jungle. And the Rebbe said, no, it's a garden. But there's a true understanding of the soul. Who has a monopoly of understanding the soul, if not Torah? God created the soul. Who knows the soul better than God? Some psychologists are like scientists. They're experimenting. They're trying. I'm not going to say that they don't, even a broken clock is right twice a day, they say. So I'm not going to say that it's Chochmah B'goyim Taimin. There's a wisdom that people who are intelligent did studies, and there are truths. Viktor Frankl, the Rebbe speaks about him in a positive way, and others. So it's not like there's no wisdom there. But on the other hand, we have a study of the soul, if you wish, psychology, that goes back thousands of years. And more than that, Bodek Manusa, who has suffered in life more than we did. I remember meeting, I don't know if I could say this, but I'll say the Dalai Lama. I don't know if you can use his name even. Whatever. But he is a very humble man, and it's interesting that any Jew that comes to see him, he says, why are you coming to me? You have the original. We learned it all from you. That's what he tells Jews all the time. And he said to me, he said, where did you, he wants to know, how did the Jews survive without a land for so many years? Because he says, I'm in that situation. We're exiled from Tibet and trying to figure out how are we going to ever survive. And the second thing is, nobody understands the soul better, because not only do you understand the soul, you've gone through suffering. We all know that when you suffer and you deal with it and you build resilience and how do you build a life after a Holocaust or through other things, that's the Chochmas HaNefesh. Nothing is close to that type of, because it's not just a theoretical wisdom. It's real life wisdom that our grandmothers and grandfathers, whether it's through laughter or through stories or through music or through song or through whatever it is, and of course through Chassidus and Torah, that allowed them, and this is all the best kept secret. This is our responsibility as the arms and legs and the mouthpiece of the Rebbe. The Rebbe said a few weeks before he had the stroke, that when a Rebbe has a stroke, it's the job of those that heard him speak to be his mouthpiece. That's what he said. Just Aaron was the mouthpiece of Moshe, that we have to be the mouthpiece. Look, Gimel Shvat Tovshin Nun Beis, 6 weeks before Chav Zayin Adar. The Rebbe said it. I remember when the Rebbe said the Sikh, everyone was very disturbed, because no one understood why is the Rebbe speaking about a stroke. No one had any inkling what was coming. Yeah, he spoke about the Friediker Rebbe. He didn't say the word stroke. He said that it affected his speech. Yeah, he spoke about the Friediker Rebbe. He wasn't speaking about just, he said Friediker Rebbe had, and a doctor asked the Friediker Rebbe, I think the words were, I don't think the Rebbe quoted this part, that I'm not a Maimon, but you are. Why would your God strike you of all places in the two faculties that are most needed for your connection with your Chassidim? Your mouth and your right hand. Writing. That's what he asked. And they said the Friediker Rebbe didn't answer at the time. It's printed, it's Muge. Shabbos Parsha Boy, together with Gimel Shvat, Tov Shinun Beis. And the Rebbe then went on to explain. And he said the first Rebbe of all was also Moshe, Kvad Peh, Kvad Loshen, Aral Svasayim, Lo Yish Dvarim Anechi. You have, and why would Hashem choose a person of all people who's supposed to be his communicator? Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai. Someone that, and that's what Moshe said. Why are you sending me? Send Aaron. So Hashem says, Misam Pella Adam. What do you think? I'm not looking for an orator. I'm looking for someone who's going to be my mouthpiece. I give man a mouth to speak. So, and this man, I always point out, is Elo Dvarim Asher Dibra Moshe, the man without words. Lo Ish Dvarim Anechi, his words are more repeated than any other person's words in history. Can you imagine? To tell you that it's not the words you say, it's whose words you're saying. And Moshe was that mouthpiece. And the Rebbe quoted that and said, why is that? Because Moshe was Alma Diskasia, Min Amayim Mishisihu, so he came from the world of Machshava. And Machshava is so intense, you can't express it in words. It means Alma Moshe, they said expression in Paris, France, that when the Friediker Rebbe had the stroke and difficulty speaking, he said these words, Nu zevi grob de Welt is, am kenish verstehen was the Rebbe sagt. In other words, the Rebbe is in a deeper, higher place. Obviously, we want both. So the Rebbe then concluded that when there's a stroke, that's our job, is to go and be the mouthpiece and actually reach from Mayim, which is Alma Diskasi Machshove, and bring it into Dibur. I mean, that to me was it was what drove me to write Toward a Meaningful Life, because I said, that's what I did. I was a chayzer. So my job is to be the mouthpiece. So I'll do what I can. My point is, today, more than ever, after Gimel Tammuz, this is the Hey Teves message. That we have to take Torah, Chassidus, the Rebbeim, Mesa Nefesh for it, and translate it in terms that people say, I can't live without it. You know, they use a word today that the information has to be addictive, a good addictive, meaning you can't live without it. And if it's optional, means, okay, you know, when I have time, I'll do it. I think this is to me, it's one of the most important mandates of our time. And not only is it going to help us, I think it changes the world. I can tell you from my little experience, and it's little, you know, there's still 8 billion people on this planet, that there's proof of concept. That means that there is a formula. There's a working formula. Look at people who were transformed or changed through Chassidus, and you have to figure out how to replicate that. And if you feel you don't know how to do it, so reach out to others that do it, some successfully, some more success, less success, but people are working on it. I do think that there's a shift, and it's going to be spreading more and more, especially with technology. But you really want, like, people want to go away with a tapora de placha, like real action. CTA, call to action, yeah? Okay, using all the modern lingo, just for established credibility, you know, is that the call to action is that we have to in our own way. And this does not mean you have to be the biggest maskil and understand all the deepest ideas of Chassidus. It means whatever you do understand, find a way to apply it to a personal life situation, real life situation, whether it's dealing with a child, with an adult, with personal challenges. And if you don't have an answer, remember, Shailas Chacham Chetzi Tshuva. God has a solution for that too. The question of a wise person is half an answer. You have the question. Along many years of my life, I thought people were coming to me with questions and I provided answers. The last few years, it started changing. They come to me with answers and I give them the questions. So sometimes framing the question can be more important than the answer, frankly, because you have to know what is your real question. And when you have the question, you ultimately find an answer. When you don't have the question, it doesn't bother you, or you don't even know how to define the question. Remember, most people come with a problem, they never tell you what their real problem is. Not because they don't know, not because they're hiding it, because they themselves don't know. We look at symptoms. Like you'll say, my marriage isn't working, or I'm having difficulty with my children. That's a symptom. The root is not the difficulty with your children. The root is not even how your children speak to you or you speak to them. It's what's going on behind the scenes. And roots are harder to see. It's harder to see how things progress. You know, I talked before about a Alter Rebbe Teves, Hey Teves, that you have to nip it in the bud. You think problems happen in people's lives when they happen? They happened years ago. When the roots of a tree somewhere are compromised, of course the tree 20 years later, somewhere something's going to give. You don't have to, but you have to be wise. You know, I'm convinced when the Rebbe established Tzivus Hashem in Tovshem Mem Aleph, 1980, 81, you know, it wasn't just about chinuch, educating children. Of course it was that. I think the Rebbe felt that the children need additional reinforced tools and reinforced care and attention, because he saw the challenges that were coming. And the more you can give them energy and strength and confidence and yes, a vote of confidence and showing them that they are critical and valuable, the more powerful they will be able to grow into great adults. I have no question about it. And you see the sichos to Tzivus Hashem, they're all about how to shape children, how to help shape their lives and shape their souls into growing to be what they should be. Because at the end of the day, broken adults start when you're children. That's how it works. It does not come from nowhere. And so Chassidus is all of that. I'll just share with you. I saw a Yechidus with David Raskin, Tafshin Yud. This goes back 1950. He's a bocher. David Raskin, famous David Raskin, the Mashpia, head of Tzach, very dedicated Chassid. So he was Yechidus by the Rebbe. And the Rebbe actually edited it. He wrote it down afterwards, and the Rebbe edited it. So there's 2 points there that really jumped out at me. He asked the Rebbe, what happens if you learn Chassidus and it doesn't affect you? What do you do? And 2, how are you supposed to learn Chassidus? What's the right way to learn Chassidus? And the Rebbe, as I said, answered, and the Rebbe edited. It's around. I've seen the man, his grandson, Benzi Pearson, was Mefarsim it. And the Rebbe answers the first question. He says, learning Chassidus is like walking in a bright sunny day and the warm sunlight is shining on you. The fact that your eyes are closed or you're not feeling it doesn't mean it's not shining on you. So Chassidus is affecting you no matter what. You have to figure out how to appreciate the warmth and the light that it's giving you. That's the first. It's a mashal. The Rebbe is all mashal. I don't think I ever saw it anywhere else. Which we can analyze what that means, but that's what the Rebbe says. The second question, how to learn, the Rebbe says when you learn a mimer, and I think the Rebbe refers to an actual mimer, after every sif, meaning after every paragraph or section, no matter what it says in the mimer, you have to ask yourself, how is that going to affect you tomorrow morning? Or you know, what are you going to do about it? In other words, for example, if you're learning about the mile of Torah, that Torah is a reis of a kutshabrichu kulachad. You know, the Eibishter gave us, he invested himself in Torah, and all the miles of Torah, chochmei law. So then the sif ends. So ask yourself, is this going to help you tomorrow learn Torah, more Torah? In other words, tomorrow you're going to have an extra share or extra passion in your learning. That's the hit on. In other words, don't just let the idea right away apply it to a practical action that I'm going to learn with more commitment because now I appreciate what Torah is. And the Rebbe says another example, again, that I never saw. He says the teichen of the mimer, the content, is, the Rebbe says, is like the substance. But the bechein, what the lesson you're taking from it, is like the needle. A needle is a very, very narrow needle. You can't wear a needle. A needle is not a garment. The garment is the content, but it's only the needle that pierces through the garment. And that's what a bechein is. A bechein is not about how powerful the idea is, that it's negated to benefit, it's negated to you. It pierces through. So the Rebbe says a needle can make a hole even more than a finger, a thick thumb. I'm not sure the right word he uses there, which word. But basically, so you know, these are like real, this is stuff to work with, because it's telling you that Chassidus does impact. So the Rebbe had a very common expression he would quote from Yerushalmi. It says, Imreiku mikemhu. If it's empty, it's coming from you, the emptiness. Most people, when they're lacking something, they look for a scapegoat. My father did this, my mother did that, my friend, my this, my that. You always find the principal, this one, that one. You know, most often, I mean, there are people the other way around. They always blame themselves for everything. But what the bottom line is, imreiku, like when I hear people ask a question on anything, Chassidus or the Rebbe, So I always say to myself, I say to them, 1 second, you're questioning the Rebbe or the Chassidus. Maybe you have to question yourself. Maybe you don't understand what they said. Why are you saying that what the problem is with what they said? Maybe you don't get it. In other words, Chassidus is there, it's shining a light. The question is, what are we lacking? And when you think like that, that's a very different approach. Because you believe, you know that this thing will work. You have the confidence. Now you have to figure out how it's going to work. So there's an importance in appreciating the emes of what it is. So, we can go on all night, as you can see. I was once, remember Rabbi Avram Flint, Olav Shalom? Yeah. So I was once walking down Kingston Avenue. I was on President Street, and I could see he's standing on the corner of Kingston Eastern Parkway, and I saw he's waiting for me. I don't know, he had that stand, like he's waiting for me to arrive. So I thought I'm going to get a nice Kabbalah's ponim. Okay. I come over, and he was a man of very few words. But he says to me, it's not like we talked every day. He says to me, Amod nezach, a strange thing. So I said, what? He says, Rab Geshen ber Paharer had gered zeir bekitzer. He spoke very little. And that was it. That's all he had to say to me. I know exactly what he meant. My great-grandfather is Gershon ber Paharer. My father is Gershon ber. He's a great-great-grandson of Gershon ber Paharer, who was a Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. And he spoke very little. He had, I think, a speech issue. And basically he's telling me, and you don't know how to stop speaking. So it's a modnazach. It's a strange thing. So I said to him, where does that say? I never saw that before. So he tells me, Parsha Vayetze, I think Tov Shin Aleph. So I went to look it up. I didn't find it. I'm telling you, this is a story, Ma'aser Shoya. So I met him in 70 in Shabbos. I said, it's not in Tov Shin Aleph. Okay, I'll look. 2 years later, I promise you, 2 years later, I don't think we spoke in between them, maybe once or twice, but now, he comes over to me one day and he says to me, Tov Shin Bey's page 172. That's all he says. Wow. So now I remembered, so I know what he was referring to. He did not add one extra word. Interesting. So maybe he's a grandson of Gershon ber Paharer. And then I found the Sikh. Taka says that there were 3 Chassidim. There was Gershon ber Paharer. There was Hillel Paritcher had a son called, forgot the name, Rab something. Not Mordechai Hillel. No, not Mordechai. Not Beryl. Maybe Mordechai Tzvi. Not Tzvi. No, I don't know. A son and a third Chassid who was it? Isaac Homler? I don't remember. And when they came to these 3 Chassidim to hear about the Tzemach Tzedek, people wanted stories. So Gershon ber Paharer would speak so briefly, nobody knew what he's talking about because it was so bekitzer. The other one spoke so abstractly they couldn't figure it out. It was so deep. And it was Reb Hillel's son that they were able to pasmakim visit. They enjoyed because he would tell them the details. Okay, so I guess the theory of evolution works, which means as the genes evolved, we became, speakers. We talk a lot. But the point is, lo yad diburim iker, right? But the main thing is ma'aser b'peil. So, my friends, it's an honor that we are in this generation. Yes, it has its challenges, but it has its unbelievable blessings. We can sit here in Farbrengen, we don't have all the challenges that previous generations and all the Chassidus. Our challenge, frankly, is our comforts and our apathy and the ease of things. So easy. And that is many times much, much harder. But Hey Teves teaches us that there is eternity among us. We are not temporary creatures, that we have the ability to change the world forever. And we have the tools, we were given the resources, we have Chassidus, including Torah, and we were taught those ideas. Our challenge is to apply it, to make it real in our personal lives. Everybody can do it. Everybody. As the Rebbeim said clearly, it's for everybody. They didn't say it's just for some group. The Alter Rebbe made it clear it's not a party. The Chassidus is not a maflega. It's not for one group or another group. And as I said, if you don't know how to translate it, find people who do. And that's the revolution that we have to create. So it's 36 years since Hey Tammuz, since Hey Teves. Yes, I will not say a Freudian slip, not Freudian, Alter Rebbe slip. But it's 36 years from Hey Teves. It's almost, what is it? When Mem Pei Gimel, it's 29 years from Gimel Tammuz, right? Man alive, it's a lot of years. And the clock is ticking. So Rabbi Posner asked me what resolution I made for my birthday. So I said, be careful what you ask for, because I actually have one. I have it all ready. I prepared myself. So here's I think I said it by last Farbrengen, but might as well say it again. So as a person who, what can I say? I read about things, but I don't always know how to implement it. So, you read about, who reads, for example, business books? Only people who are not business people, Business people don't need to read these books. They know what to do. So I read these books just to say, okay, how do you distribute? How do you reach large numbers? So I came upon this consistent message. How do you reach the tipping point? How does a product or a service or something become universal? How did Apple become Apple, or Google, and stuff like that, Coca-Cola? So they call it a tipping point, that you do enough and then it tips and then the rest follows. And what's the tipping point? It's hitting the critical mass, which is 20% of the population. And there's even a breakdown who the 20% are. There's innovators and early adopters and late adopters and laggards and the whole thing. I know there's some experts here, so they know all this language, right? Anyway, but so they say 20% of any community, you reach that's the tipping point, and the rest follows. But 20% is a serious number. So I took a calculator, and I took 8 billion people. Yeah. 20% of 8 billion is 1.6 billion. And I said, okay, that's the achlot. Can we reach 1.6 billion people with Chassidus? Okay, we have to know what reach means. It can't just be superficial. It has to be something, but fine. But it's at least, so that's my achlot. Since the clock is ticking, the nitzchis of Chassidus and Chassidim I'm not worried about. I'm worried whether I'll be around. I'm worried about myself, whether I'll be, I want to be part of this, this transformation. The Rebbe promised and said that the world is ready, and we have to just open our eyes. If you believe in the Rebbe, and I say if because anybody can choose not to, but if you do, it means what it means. There's no ifs or buts. Those are the words. That means that the world is receptive. We know we have the product. So we'll call it the chutzah is there, the ma'anesecha we have. So now the challenge is the yafutzu. How do we create the distribution channels? How do we disseminate hafutz? The Rebbe once wrote, "Kimedumani haloshen hu lo yatfisu ma'anesecha chutza, el yafutzu ma'anesecha chutza." See the difference? That the loshen is kimedumani. The Rebbe is being somewhat, getting a little sarcastic. That the language is not to print the well springs, but to spread the well springs. And that's a big difference. When you print them, they stay on shelves. And with shelves, you know what that means. Distribution is a very different business. So there you have my achlata. And obviously, no one can do this alone. But I'm going to be pushing toward this. And even though it's my birthday, so I have to make the achlatas, but you know what? It's Hey Teves for everybody. So now everybody's got to make their achlatas. You can make any achlata you like. I just feel, I guess based on my temperament and my disposition and personality, that the Rebbe Chassidus is for the world, and it's not limited just to Crown Heights or Broad Park or Williamsburg or Lakewood or Toms River or Atlanta, where are the new budding communities, Miami, Florida. But it's for everybody, literally. And you reach a critical mass, you don't have to reach 100%, then things will happen. One thing is for sure, if you don't show up, for sure it's not going to happen. So we all hope that God will be merciful, and the Rebbe will be merciful, and it'll just happen, l'mayla l'mata, an epiphany from above, by grace. But at the same time, every second we're here, we have to do whatever we can. Those are the Rebbe's words as well. So, to me, that's Hey Teves in the fullest glory of really demonstrating the eternal message that's both timeless and timely for our day today, that we can say in the very near future that the psychology of the future of the world is Teres Chassidus, Mola Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayin Layom Mechasim. That's the words. It's not my words, Yeshaya Novi. The Rambam quotes it, Lo yeh kol ha'esek kol ha'elam el l'das es Hashem bolvad. To knowing God. And what is knowing God? That's what Chassidus is. That's what teaches you what God is about, how God thinks, what God expects of us, how to look at life through God's eyes, not through human eyes. That's our mission. L'chaim, maybe be zeichet to that. B'korev. And, the Rebbe told my father-in-law on his birthday. It's an unbelievable bracha, and I say the bracha to each of you, to myself, and you can share this anytime. I think it's the best birthday blessing you'll ever hear. My father-in-law was involved in publishing, Heske Gansberg, in publishing the Maimorim, and the Rebbe was before Rosh Hashanah. His birthday was, I think, Chav Zayin Elul, something like that, the end of Elul. And he was by the Rebbe. He was a Bacher. The year was Tafshin Yud Aleph, 1951. So it's a year after Yud Shvat, yeah. And the Rebbe says to him, you prepared the Kuntras, which is the pamphlet for Rosh Hashanah, the Maimorim. The Rebbe published then the Maimorim for that period. So go to the Ohel and tell the Shver, tell my father-in-law that you prepared the Maimer and ask for, bracha. So my Shver indicated, like he didn't say anything, but his body language, he indicated that, I'm standing before my Rebbe, like why are you sending me there? He didn't say it, so the Rebbe says to him, the Rebbe sensed what he meant, so the Rebbe said to him, for dorten, rei dorten with the reds da. Speak there as you're speaking here. That's what the Rebbe's words are. Just telling you the story as it was. Then the Rebbe said these words, der Eberste soll helfen, as a Teil von den Jahren, was der Rebbe gewollt eisführen in der Welt, soll sich eisführen durch dir. What do you think about that? Unbelievable bracha. The Rebbe said that the Rebbe said to him, God should help, that part of the things the Rebbe wanted to accomplish in this world should be accomplished through you. So I say that, so halavai, I can live up to that. Halavai, each of you can live up to that. And for a Chassid, that's like the ultimate, because remember, just not that we're comparing, but the Rebbe himself would say, I'm here as a shliach Hashem, I'm doing what God wants us to do. That's what it comes down to. So really you have two choices in life. You're going to serve yourself, or you're going to serve a cause greater than yourself. My friends, sometimes things are black and white. You're either part of the problem, or you're part of the solution. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. Anything else you have to sell and so on.
So many blockages.
Because every great thing has to have its obstacles. What can I say? So l'chaim, everyone. A very good yontif.
Thank you. You should have a healthy.
So we are pulling him shaches of all us.
L'chaim, all your brothers, and continue what Rebbe. Continue everything with what you said.
Thank you.
Spread the message.
Yeah.
Rebbe to the world.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, you can do it. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.